Welcome, my friends. How are you tonight? I hope you're doing well. Tonight's stories come from isolated trails, abandoned campsites, and the darkest corners of America's wilderness. Before we begin, let's see if we can reach 1,000 likes and 1,000 comments on this video. If you enjoy scary stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Now dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's begin. I started my day like any other, rolled out of bed, threw on my uniform, and grabbed my badge. The usual routine. What I didn't know was that this would be the worst day of my life. I've been the sheriff of Montrose, Kentucky for about 12 years now. Small-town policing has its charm, domestic disputes, the occasional meth lab in some guy's backyard, and breaking up high school parties. But Montrose is so quiet. Most days I just drive around making sure everyone's lawn looks good enough to avoid a fine. That was until 1997. I still remember the date because I'd just come back from the courthouse, October 17th. The air had that crisp fall feel, leaves turning amber and gold across the mountains. The kind of perfect autumn day that makes you forget the world can be an ugly place. I had my boots up on the desk, the radio playing some old Conway Twitty when the call came in. It was Donna Mitchell, owner of a little diner by the lake, the Blue Water Cafe, a place where locals gathered for gossip served alongside eggs and bacon. Donna wasn't prone to panic. In the 5 years I'd known her, she'd handled drunk fishermen, rowdy teenagers, and even a small kitchen fire without breaking a sweat. But today, her voice trembled. "Sheriff? We've got a situation. A woman just came in. She's hysterical. Says her fiancé went hiking yesterday and never came back." I sighed, reaching for my thermos. "Tell her to calm down. Probably just got himself lost. Happens every season." "I don't think so." Donna's voice dropped to a whisper. "She was out searching this morning and found his water bottle. Says there was blood on it." That made me sit up straight. "Blood? She sure?" Red enough to make her scream when she saw it. "And Sheriff, there's something else. Those noises are back." My hand paused on the thermos cap. The noises had been a point of contention in town council meetings for years. Some blamed mining operations in the next county over. Others said it was just the wind playing tricks through the mountain passes. But Donna, she'd been adamant it was something else. "Donna, it's Kentucky. We got raccoons, foxes, maybe a bobcat if we're lucky." "I know what animals sound like," she snapped, her voice suddenly hard with conviction. "This is different. It's wrong." I could picture her standing there, phone cord wrapped around her finger, glancing nervously out at the pines that pressed close to the back of her diner. The forest around Montrose was old, the kind of old that seemed to watch you back. "I'll check it out," I said, already reaching for my keys. "Keep the woman there." The missing hiker's name was William Foster, Donna told me. Everyone called him Will. He was from Louisville, in town for a weekend getaway with his fiancée, Rebecca. They were staying at one of the lakeside cabins, planning their wedding for the spring. Just another city couple looking for a quaint mountain backdrop for their photos. The drive to the Blue Water Cafe took me past all the familiar landmarks of Montrose. The hardware store where Old Man Winters had been selling the same inventory since the 70s. The post office with its cracked steps and faded flag. The elementary school where my nephew went. Playground empty on a Saturday. It was all so normal. So goddamn normal. Rebecca Peters was sitting in a corner booth when I arrived. Her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee she wasn't drinking. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that looked like it had been neat yesterday. Now wisps escaped around her face, which was pale with fear. "Miss Peters?" I slid into the seat across from her. "I'm the sheriff. Donna says your fiancé is missing?" She nodded, pushing a cell phone across the table. "We have reception at the cabin, but his phone's been off since yesterday afternoon. He said he was just going for a quick hike before dinner. 2 hours tops." "And when did you start to worry?" "When it got dark." She swallowed hard. "Will's punctual. Always has been. He wouldn't just not come back. And this morning, I went looking and found this." She placed a blue water bottle on the table. There were indeed dark stains on it, rusty brown now that they'd dried. Blood, most likely. "Where exactly did you find this?" "About half a mile up the old ridge trail. It was just lying there, off the path a bit." Her voice cracked. "There were marks in the dirt, like something had been dragged." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral while something cold settled in my stomach. The old ridge trail had a reputation. Nothing official, nothing you'd find in reports, but locals knew to be off that trail before sundown. "I'll head up there now," I told her, pocketing the water bottle in an evidence bag. "Was he carrying anything else? Backpack? Camera?" "A small backpack. Green. Had our first aid kit, some granola bars, his pocket knife. And his camera. He's a photographer. That's why we came here. The fall colors. Her voice caught. Please find him. I promised I would, though something in me already doubted the outcome would be what she hoped for. As I headed back to my cruiser, Donna caught me by the arm. You watch yourself up there, she said, her eyes serious. Whatever made those noises, I heard them again last night. Went on for hours. What do they sound like? I asked, curious despite myself. She thought for a moment. Like something big moving through the trees, but not natural, not like an animal, more deliberate. She shivered. And sometimes, it sounds almost like words. I nodded, not wanting to dismiss her, but not ready to believe in monsters either. I'll keep my radio on. Call if Rebecca remembers anything else. The drive to the trailhead took 15 minutes, winding up through pine forests that grew thicker and darker the higher I went. I parked by the weathered sign that said, Old Ridge Trail, 2 miles to summit. There were no other cars in the small gravel lot, just mine, and the endless wall of trees. I grabbed my flashlight even though it was barely noon. The trail ahead disappeared into shadow quickly, the forest canopy so thick that sunlight only reached the ground in scattered patches. I checked my gun too, making sure it was loaded. Standard procedure, I told myself, ignoring the prickle of unease at the back of my neck. The trail started off innocently enough. Packed dirt, occasional stone steps where the path steepened, the usual markers nailed to trees. But as I walked, I noticed the silence creeping in. The woods around Montrose were usually alive with sound, birds calling, squirrels chattering, the constant background rustle of small creatures going about their business. But here, nothing. Just the crunch of my boots and my own breathing, growing more deliberate as I pushed deeper into the woods. About 20 minutes up the trail, I reached the spot Rebecca must have described. The path widened slightly, opening into a small rest area with a fallen log serving as a bench. Scattered around were signs of a brief stop, a granola bar wrapper caught in the underbrush, an impression in the pine needles where someone might have sat, and there, just as she'd said, signs of disturbance off the main trail. I crouched down, examining the forest floor. The pine needles and leaves were scraped away in a long, continuous path, leading deeper into the trees. In places, dark stains splattered the foliage. More blood. I straightened up, unholstering my gun. 12 years of law enforcement, and I'd drawn my weapon maybe a dozen times, usually just as a precaution. But something about this scene made the hair on my arms stand up. This wasn't a lost hiker or a twisted ankle. This was something else. I followed the drag marks, pushing through underbrush that grew thicker as I moved away from the trail. The blood splatter increased, no longer just drops but smears, as if something bleeding heavily had been pulled through the forest. I used my radio to call in my position and the situation, but got only static in return. The mountains around Montrose were notorious for dead zones. The silence pressed in around me, unnaturally complete. No wind through the trees, no insects buzzing, nothing. It was as if the whole forest was holding its breath, waiting. That's when I noticed the smell. At first, just the usual forest scents. Pine sap, damp earth, decaying leaves. But underneath, something sickly sweet and metallic. The unmistakable smell of fresh blood and opened flesh. The drag marks led me to a small clearing, where the trees parted just enough to let weak sunlight filter down. And there, in that hollow space between ancient trees, I found what was left of Will Foster. He was lying face down, his limbs twisted at angles that human joints weren't meant to bend. His green backpack was still strapped to his back, but it had been torn open, the contents scattered, a first aid kit ripped apart, energy bar wrappers, a shattered camera lens reflecting pinpoints of light. But it wasn't the disarray that made me stop cold. It was the wounds. 4 deep parallel gashes ran down his back, from his shoulder blades to his hips, slicing through his hiking jacket, the shirt beneath, and deep into the flesh. The cuts were clean, precise, not the ragged tears of an animal attack, but something almost surgical. The edges of the wounds weren't jagged but smooth, as if whatever had made them had blades rather than claws. I'd seen bear attacks before. I'd seen what mountain lions could do. This was neither. Bears maul, they tear, they crush. Mountain lions go for the throat, the back of the neck. This was methodical, deliberate. I crouched beside the body, careful not to disturb the scene more than necessary. Will's head was turned to the side, one eye open, staring blindly at the forest floor. In death, his face was frozen in an expression of pure terror, not just pain, but the kind of fear that comes from seeing something your mind refuses to process. As I examined the body, I noticed something else strange. Despite the severity of the wounds, there was less blood than there should have been. Yes, the forest floor was stained dark beneath him, but not enough for wounds this catastrophic. It was as if he'd been killed elsewhere and brought here. Or as if something had. I stopped that thought before it could fully form. But a chill ran down my spine anyway. I reached for my radio again, ready to call this in as a homicide, when I heard it. A low rumbling noise from somewhere behind me. Not quite a growl, not quite a purr, but something in between. It reminded me of the sound a mountain makes before an avalanche. A deep, subsonic vibration you feel more than hear. Slowly, I turned, my hand tightening on my gun. At first I saw nothing, just trees and shadows. But then a shadow moved, detached itself from the others, took shape. At the edge of the clearing, partially hidden by the trunk of a massive pine, stood something. My first confused thought was that it was a man in some kind of costume. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized no human could move like that, could be shaped like that. It was hunched forward, its back curved in a way that should have been anatomically impossible. Its limbs were wrong, too long, too jointed, like a spider's legs stretched and covered with leathery skin. It had a head, broad and flat like a hammer, but where its face should have been, there was only a suggestion of features, indentations rather than eyes, a slash rather than a mouth. We stared at each other across the clearing. I couldn't see its eyes, but I knew it was watching me, studying me. There was intelligence in its stillness, a predatory patience that made my finger tremble on the trigger of my gun. I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at me to turn and sprint back down the trail. But I knew, somehow I knew, that it would be on me before I'd gone 10 steps. The thing shifted its weight, wood cracking beneath what passed for its feet. It moved with a fluid grace that nothing so twisted should have possessed. And then it made that sound again, that rumbling that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating in my chest like bass notes too deep to properly hear. My mouth was dry. "What do you want?" I called out, immediately regretting making any noise at all. The thing's head tilted, like a dog trying to understand human speech. Then it moved forward, one deliberate step at a time, emerging fully from the tree line. In the weak sunlight I could see it better, though part of me wished I couldn't. Its skin wasn't just leathery but almost bark-like, with ridges and furrows like an ancient tree. It stood at least 7 feet tall when upright, though it preferred to hunch, bringing its head down to the level of my chest. Its arms, if you could call them that, hung nearly to the ground, ending in hands with too many joints, too many fingers, each tipped with what looked more like bone than claw. I raised my gun, aiming at what I hoped was a vital area, though I had no idea if this thing even had organs arranged like a normal creature. "Stay back," I warned, my voice steadier than I felt. It paused, that strange head tilting the other way. Then, without warning, it charged. I fired 3 times. The shots cracked through the silence of the forest like thunder. I might have hit it. There was a spray of something dark where one bullet connected, but it didn't slow. It crossed the clearing in 3 bounding strides, moving with a speed that nothing that size should have possessed. I dove to the side, rolling through pine needles and leaves as it rushed past me. The thing skidded, tearing up earth as it turned, those long limbs splaying out for balance. It reared up to its full height, and I swear I heard bones popping and joints cracking as it reconfigured itself for another charge. I scrambled backward, my back hitting a tree trunk. Nowhere left to go. The creature advanced more slowly now, almost savoring the moment. I raised my gun again, knowing it was useless but unwilling to die without a fight. And then came the blast of a shotgun, so close and so loud it left my ears ringing. The creature jerked, a chunk of its shoulder disappearing in a spray of dark matter. It made a sound then, not a scream, not a roar, but a deep, guttural grunt that seemed to come from some ancient place. Then it bolted, moving in a blur of limbs and shadow, disappearing into the trees faster than my eyes could track it. I spun around, looking for my savior, gun still raised. "You can put that down, son. It's gone for now." An old man stood at the edge of the clearing, a shotgun cradled in his arms like an old friend. He was tall and rail-thin, with a face weathered by decades in the sun. A gray beard reached halfway down his chest, and beneath a battered cap, sharp blue eyes regarded me with a mixture of concern and what looked like resignation. "Roy," I gasped, recognizing the old groundskeeper who maintained the cabins around the lake. "What the hell was that thing?" Roy Simmons spat tobacco juice onto the forest floor, then slowly lowered his shotgun. "Been here longer than any of us," he said, his voice gravelly from years of smoke and whiskey. "Longer than the town, probably." "That doesn't answer my question," I said, finally lowering my own weapon, though my hand was shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. "Not sure anyone has a proper answer," Roy replied, moving forward to stand beside Will's body. He looked down at the corpse with an expression that spoke of unwelcome familiarity. "Not sure what to call it, but it ain't just an animal, it's smarter. Hunts like a predator, but doesn't eat like one. I blinked, trying to process this. Doesn't eat? Then why? It kills, Roy said simply, still looking at the mangled body. It kills and leaves the bodies, just like this one. He nudged the corpse with the toe of his boot. Always the same marks, always the same look in their eyes. How long have you known about this thing? I asked Roy, my mind still struggling to process what I'd just seen. Roy sighed, suddenly looking every one of his 70-plus years. Known about it since I was a boy. My grandfather used to warn us. Stay off the mountain after dark. Don't go wandering alone. He gazed off into the trees where the creature had disappeared. Back then it was just stories, things to scare kids straight. But then in '73 a family went camping up near Blackwater Falls. Parents and 2 kids. He shook his head. Found him just like this one. State police said it was a bear. Case closed. My radio crackled to life, making us both jump. Dispatch asking for an update. I keyed the mic, hesitated, then reported finding the missing hiker, apparent animal attack, requesting state police and the county coroner. I didn't mention Roy, didn't mention what I'd seen. I wasn't ready to put that in an official report. Why haven't you told anyone? I asked Roy when I'd signed off. People are dying. Told plenty, he shrugged. Sheriff before you. Mayor, Forest Service. Nobody believes in old drunk spinning monster stories. He spat again. Besides, it don't come out much, maybe once every few years. Takes someone, then goes back to wherever it hides. And what? We just accept that? Let tourists wander up here to get slaughtered? Roy's eyes hardened. What would you have me do? Hunt it? I've tried. So did my father before me. That thing. He gestured with his shotgun toward the forest. It knows these woods better than any man alive, and it's smarter than it looks. Watches, waits, learns. I looked down at Will Foster's body, at the precision of those awful cuts. What is it? Some kind of mutated animal? Roy laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. Ain't no animal. Animals kill for food, for territory. This thing, it kills because it wants to, because it can. We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of his words settling around us like the unnatural quiet of the forest. We need to get the body back to town, I finally said, and I need to tell his fiancée. Roy nodded. I'll help you carry him. Ain't right to drag him back like the thing did. It took us nearly an hour to get Will's body back to the trailhead. We fashioned a crude stretcher from fallen branches and Roy's hunting jacket, working in near silence. I kept glancing over my shoulder, scanning the trees, jumping at every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves. But the forest remained quiet, as if the thing had never been there at all. As we loaded the body into the back of my cruiser, Roy put a hand on my arm. Listen, he said, his voice low. This ain't going in no official report, is it? I hesitated. I have to report something, Roy. A man is dead. Sure, animal attack. Mountain lion maybe. But not that thing. Town don't need that kind of attention, and who'd believe you anyway? His blue eyes held mine. You saw what happened when it got shot, barely slowed it down. You start telling people about monsters in the woods, they'll either think you're crazy or they'll come looking with hunting rifles and get themselves killed. He had a point. What would I even say? That I saw some kind of impossible creature that shouldn't exist? That an old mountain man saved me with a well-timed shotgun blast? I'd be laughed out of law enforcement, best case scenario. Worst case, I'd trigger a panic or a monster hunting frenzy that would only lead to more deaths. I'll keep it simple, I agreed reluctantly. But Roy, we can't just ignore this. What if it comes back? What if it comes closer to town next time? Roy's face grew solemn. It won't. Not for a while anyway. It's got patterns. Takes someone, then disappears for months, sometimes years. Like it needs to. I don't know, digest or something. Though it don't eat what it kills. How many? How many people has it taken that you know of? He thought for a moment. Since I've been alive? Maybe a dozen. Not all reported. Hunters, hikers, couple of locals who should have known better. He looked away. My brother, back in '84, went hunting alone, against my warnings. Found pieces of him scattered across half a mile of ridgeline. I didn't know what to say to that. I'm sorry. Seemed woefully inadequate. Just watch yourself, Roy said, stepping back from the cruiser. And maybe put up some signs. Close that trail for a while. Say there's been bear sightings. I nodded, climbing into the driver's seat. Where can I find you? If I have more questions. Cabin 8, down by the lake. The old caretaker's place. He tapped the roof of my car. Be careful what you put in that report, Sheriff. Some things, once they're written down, take on a life of their own. I drove back to town with Will Foster's body in my back seat. The air conditioning cranked to full blast, despite the autumn chill. The smell of blood and something else, something wrong, filled the car. I rolled down the windows, but it didn't help. Rebecca was still at the diner when I pulled up, Donna sitting beside her, both women jumping to their feet as I entered. One look at my face told them everything they needed to know. "No," Rebecca whispered, collapsing back into the booth. "No, no, no." I sat across from her, removing my hat. "I'm so sorry, Miss Peters. We found Will up on the trail. There's been some kind of animal attack." "Animal?" Donna's eyes narrowed slightly. "Looks that way," I said, not meeting her gaze. "I've called the state police and the coroner. They'll need to examine him, do an autopsy." Rebecca was sobbing now, her shoulders shaking. "He was just going for a walk. Just a short walk before dinner." I reached across the table, touching her hand gently. "Did Will mention seeing anything unusual yesterday? Any animals? Did he say anything about noises in the woods?" She shook her head, wiping at her tears. "No, nothing. He was excited about the view from the ridge, said the light would be perfect for photos at sunset." Her voice broke. "I should have gone with him." "No," I said firmly. "You shouldn't have. Whatever happened to Will, it happened fast. There's nothing you could have done, except become another victim." I thought but didn't say. I stayed with her until the state police arrived, 2 troopers who took my statement with professional detachment. I kept it simple, just as I'd promised Roy. Missing hiker, signs of an animal attack, body recovered. I mentioned nothing about the strange precision of the wounds, nothing about the creature I'd seen, nothing about Roy Simmons and his shotgun. The lead investigator, a sergeant named Harmon, pulled me aside as they were loading Will's body into their vehicle. "What kind of animal are we talking about here, Sheriff? Bear? Cougar?" I hesitated. "Not sure. The wounds were unusual." Harmon raised an eyebrow. "Unusual how?" 4 parallel cuts. Deep. Clean. I demonstrated with my fingers. "Like this." He frowned. "Mountain lion could do that. They've got 4 main claws. Though it's odd one would attack an adult male unprovoked." "That's what I thought," I said, relieved he'd supplied a rational explanation. "We'll know more after the autopsy," Harmon continued. "You closing the trail?" "Already called the Forest Service. They're putting up notices tomorrow. Bear danger." Harmon nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good call. Last thing we need is more tourists getting themselves killed out here." As the state police drove away with Will's body, I found myself standing alone in the diner parking lot, the sun beginning to set behind the mountains. The forest loomed dark and impenetrable beyond the town limits, shadows deepening among the trees. I wondered if it was watching, if it could see me from up there, if it was already selecting its next victim. The next few days passed in a blur of paperwork and phone calls. Rebecca Peters returned to Louisville with the grim task of planning a funeral instead of a wedding. The state police finished their investigation, ruling Will Foster's death an animal attack, most likely a mountain lion, though they admitted the wounds were atypical. The case was closed, filed away, another tragic accident in the wilderness, but I couldn't let it go. At night, I dreamed of that thing in the forest. Its impossible limbs, its eyeless face, the way it moved, too fast, too fluid for something so large. In my dreams, Roy's shotgun never fired, and I felt those bone claws slice through my back just as they had through Will's. I woke, gasping, sheets soaked with sweat, reaching for my gun on the nightstand. During the day, I found myself driving up to the trailhead repeatedly, parking at the newly installed, trail closed, dangerous wildlife sign, and just sitting there, staring into the trees. I never went back up the path. Something told me the creature wouldn't appear again so soon, but I watched, and I listened. The forest remained silent. A week after finding Will's body, I finally worked up the courage to visit Roy Simmons. His cabin sat at the far end of the lakeside resort, separated from the tourist accommodations by a stand of pines. It was an old place, logs darkened by age and weather, a stone chimney sending a thin plume of smoke into the clear autumn sky. Roy was sitting on the porch when I pulled up, as if he'd been expecting me. A shotgun, perhaps the same one that had saved my life, leaned against the wall beside his rocking chair. "Figured you'd be by eventually," he said as I approached, not bothering to stand. "Got coffee on if you want some." I sat in the empty chair beside him, looking out over the still waters of the lake. "I need to know more, Roy, about that thing." Roy sighed, reaching for a tin of tobacco on the small table between us. "Not much more to tell that I haven't already. It's been here a long time. Kills when it wants to. Can't be caught. Can't be killed, far as I know." "Have you ever tried? Besides shooting at it, I mean." He snorted. "Of course I have. Set traps all over these mountains when I was younger. After what happened to my brother. He spat over the porch railing. Never caught nothing but the occasional coyote. It's too smart for simple snares. And I had crazy ideas once. Electricity, poison, even tried to burn out a cave system I thought it might be using. He shook his head. Nothing worked, and eventually, I got too old to keep trying. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. What about the state authorities? Fish and wildlife? Hasn't anyone ever investigated? Like I said, I tried telling folks. Back in the 80s, after my brother, I went to the Forest Service. They sent 2 rangers up to look around. Never found a thing, of course. He paused, tamping tobacco into his pipe. One of them came back a month later on his own. Scientist type, real interested in what I'd described. Spent a week up in those woods with all kinds of equipment. Recording devices, cameras, the works. And Roy struck a match, the flare momentarily illuminating the deep lines of his face. They found him in pieces across Blackwater Ridge. Official report said he fell. Animals got to the body. But I saw him before they cleaned it up. Same marks, same cuts. We sat in silence for a while. The only sounds the gentle lapping of lake water against the shore and the rhythmic creak of Roy's rocking chair. The townspeople, I finally said. Do they know? Is that why no locals use that trail? Roy puffed on his pipe before answering. Some know. The older folks. They've heard the stories, seen the pattern over the years. They keep their kids close, especially when there's been a killing. But most don't believe. Not really. They just think the mountains can be dangerous. Which ain't wrong. He glanced at me. They'll forget in time. Start using the trail again. Until the next one. And we just accept that? People dying every few years? What would you have us do? Evacuate the town? Burn down the forest? That thing's been here longer than us, Sheriff. It'll be here long after we're gone. His eyes, reflecting the setting sun, looked almost yellow. Nature's got teeth and claws we've forgotten about. Sitting in our houses with our guns and our lights, we think we've conquered the wild. But there's things out there that remind us we haven't. I couldn't accept that. Couldn't accept that we were powerless against this thing, whatever it was. There has to be a way to stop it. Everything can be killed. Roy studied me for a long moment. Maybe, but not by you, not by me, and not by any hunting party you might think to organize. He tapped his pipe against the porch rail. My grandfather used to say it was a spirit, a forest demon from the old country, brought over when settlers came. My father thought it might be something left over from prehistoric times, hiding in the deep caves under the mountains. Me? He shrugged. I don't much care what it is anymore. I just know it's here, and it kills, and it can't be stopped. I left Roy's cabin as darkness fell, more frustrated than when I'd arrived. His resignation, his acceptance of the creature as some immutable fact of life, bothered me more than I wanted to admit. The drive back into town took me past the Blue Water Cafe, its windows glowing warmly in the growing darkness. On impulse, I pulled in, suddenly craving coffee and human connection to chase away the chill Roy's words had left. Donna was behind the counter, wiping down surfaces in preparation for closing. She looked up as the bell over the door announced my arrival, her expression unreadable. Sheriff, she said, her tone neutral. Coffee? Or something stronger? You look like you could use it. I sat at the counter, removing my hat. Coffee's fine, thanks. She poured me a cup, then leaned on the counter opposite me, arms folded. You've been up to Roy's place. It wasn't a question. In a town the size of Montrose, everyone knew everyone's business. I nodded. He tell you about the thing in the woods? She asked, her voice low despite us being the only ones in the diner. I looked up sharply. You know about it? Donna's face was grim. My grandmother used to call it the woodwalker. Said it walked on 2 legs sometimes, 4 others, always watching from the trees. She shivered slightly. I saw it once, when I was a girl, just for a second, at the edge of our property. Thought it was a man at first, standing too still. Then it wasn't. Why didn't you say anything? When I came to investigate Will's disappearance, she gave me a look that suggested I was being naive. Would you have believed me? Or would you have thought I was a hysterical woman seeing things that weren't there? She had a point. Before seeing it myself, I would have dismissed any talk of monsters as superstition or imagination. The noises you mentioned, I said. That's the thing? Donna nodded. It makes that sound before it hunts, like a warning or a challenge. She poured herself a cup of coffee, adding a generous splash from a bottle kept under the counter. After all these years, I still can't decide if it's intelligent. Really intelligent, I mean, or just instinctual. Whether it kills because it's natural to it, like a wolf hunting deer, or because it enjoys it. Roy thinks it's been here longer than the town. Longer than people, maybe, Donna agreed. My grandmother's people, Cherokee, They had stories, said it was old when the first tribes came to these mountains. She sipped her coffee, said it was a lesson about respecting the wild places, that some parts of the forest weren't meant for humans. I rubbed my face, suddenly exhausted. So what do we do? Just accept that occasionally it takes someone? Just close trails and put up warning signs and hope for the best? Donna's expression softened. It's what we've always done. What choice do we have? We could warn people, really warn them. Not just about bears or mountain lions, but about what's really up there. She laughed, though there was no humor in it. And say what? Welcome to Montrose, home of a prehistoric monster that occasionally dismembers hikers. Tourism is half our economy, Sheriff. The lake, the mountains, the unspoiled wilderness. That's what keeps this town alive, even if it costs lives. Her eyes hardened. Life costs lives, Sheriff. Every town has its price. Coastal towns have hurricanes. Farm communities have tornadoes. Mining towns have cave-ins. We have that thing. Once every few years, it takes someone. Usually an outsider who doesn't know better than to stay on marked trails and be back before dark. I stared into my coffee, finding no answers in its black depths. And the locals? Do they all know to stay away? The smart ones do, she said quietly. The ones who listen to the old stories, who pay attention when the forest goes quiet. She refilled my cup without asking. You've seen it now. You're one of us, one of the ones who knows. So you'll stay off that mountain when the noises start. You'll warn who you can without starting a panic. And you'll learn to live with it, just like the rest of us have. I left the diner feeling no better than when I'd entered. The town was quiet as I drove through. Most businesses closed for the night. A few locals walking dogs or sitting on porches enjoying the mild evening. Normal, peaceful, as if there wasn't something monstrous living in the hills above them. But now I noticed things I hadn't before. The way people glanced up at the mountains as the sun set. The subtle hurrying of steps as darkness fell. The porch lights left burning all night, not just for convenience but as sentinels against the dark. Montrose knew. Maybe not every resident, maybe not consciously, but the town itself. It remembered. It adapted. It survived. The question was, could I? The state police finished their investigation by the end of October. Will Foster's death was officially ruled an animal attack, likely a mountain lion, though the autopsy report noted some anomalies in the wound pattern. The case was closed. The paperwork filed. Life in Montrose returned to its quiet routine, on the surface anyway. I found myself changed by what I'd seen. I carried my service weapon even off duty now. I installed extra lights around my small house at the edge of town. I kept my blinds closed at night, unable to shake the feeling of being watched from the darkness beyond. Winter came early that year, snow falling in thick blankets across the mountains by mid-November. The tourists thinned out, the lakeside cabins emptied, and the town settled into its off-season quiet. I should have felt safer. The creature, whatever it was, hadn't been seen since the incident with Will. Roy assured me it typically went dormant during the coldest months, perhaps hibernating like a bear, but I couldn't relax. Couldn't forget. I spent my free time researching, digging through old newspaper archives, county records, anything that might give me more information about the thing in the woods. I found scattered reports going back decades. Mysterious disappearances, unusual animal attacks, bodies found with strange wounds. Never enough to establish a pattern unless you already knew what to look for. But once you did, it was unmistakable. The thing had been killing for generations. January brought a particularly brutal cold snap. Temperatures dropping below zero for a week straight. The lake froze solid. The forest paths disappeared under deep drifts, and the town huddled around fireplaces and space heaters, waiting for the worst to pass. I was at the station finishing reports on a minor fender bender, when my deputy Mark stuck his head in. Got a weird call, he said, frowning. Some kids ice fishing on the lake say they found something frozen in the ice, something big. I looked up sharply. Animal? Mark hesitated. Not sure. Kid who called was pretty freaked out. Said it didn't look like any animal he'd ever seen. My heart rate kicked up. Where on the lake? Far side, near the old boat launch. Want me to check it out? No, I said, perhaps too quickly. I'll handle it. You stay here, man the phones. 20 minutes later, I was standing on the frozen surface of Lake Montrose, the wind cutting through my heavy coat like a knife. 3 teenagers huddled nearby, stamping their feet to stay warm, their ice fishing gear abandoned. Over there, the oldest boy said, pointing to a dark spot in the ice about 50 yards away. We were drilling holes, and Jimmy here noticed it under the ice. Thought it was a deer at first, but I nodded, already moving toward the spot, the ice creaking beneath my boots. You boys stay back. Could be dangerous. As I approached, the shape beneath the ice became clearer. It was large, easily the size of a bear, but the proportions were all wrong. I knelt down, brushing away a thin layer of snow to get a better look, and there it was. The thing from the forest, perfectly preserved in the clear ice of the lake. It was curled in on itself, those long limbs wrapped around its body like a spider in death. Its leathery skin was a mottled gray-brown, textured like tree bark but with an almost metallic sheen. Its head was tucked down, but I could make out that broad, flat shape, those suggestions of features that weren't quite a face, and for the first time I could see what passed for its eyes. Not eyes at all, but dark, sunken hollows that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. I jerked back, nearly losing my balance on the slick surface. It was dead. It had to be. Frozen solid in the ice, maybe for decades. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me, even now. That those lightless pits were tracking my movements. "What is it?" one of the boys called from a safe distance. "Nothing," I called back, standing up. "Just a weirdly shaped log. Ice playing tricks on you." The boys clearly didn't believe me, but they weren't eager to come closer either. I shooed them back to shore, telling them the ice wasn't safe here, that they should find another spot to fish. As soon as they were gone, I pulled out my phone and called Roy. He arrived 30 minutes later, moving slowly across the ice, his ancient pickup parked haphazardly at the boat launch. He didn't speak as he approached, just knelt beside me and stared down at the thing trapped beneath our feet. "Well, I'll be damned," he finally said, his breath clouding in the frigid air. "Never thought I'd see it like this." "Is it dead?" I asked. Roy studied the frozen figure. "Hard to say. Could be. Could be just waiting." He tapped the ice with his knuckle. "Ice is what, 1.5 feet thick? That thing's gotta be 10-15 feet down." "How did it get there?" "It was in the forest when we saw it. Miles from the lake." Roy shrugged. "Maybe there's more than one. Maybe it moves around in ways we don't understand. Or maybe," he trailed off, eyes narrowing, "maybe this is an old one. Been here for years. Decades even." I looked at him sharply. "You think there could be more than one?" "Never seen two at once," he admitted. "But I've wondered. The pattern of killing sometimes doesn't make sense for just one creature. Sometimes they happen too close together, in places too far apart." He spat on the ice. "Or maybe it just moves faster than we think possible." We stood in silence for a long moment, the wind whistling across the frozen lake. "What do we do?" I finally asked. "We could try to cut it out, study it, or destroy it." Roy laughed harshly. "With what? Chainsaws? Dynamite? You really want to mess with that thing, even if it is dead?" He shook his head. "Besides, look at the ice around it." I hadn't noticed before, but now I saw what he meant. The ice directly surrounding the creature was different, darker, almost black in places, with spiderweb cracks radiating outward. "It's melting through," I whispered. "Even frozen. It's affecting the ice." Roy nodded grimly. "Best leave it be. Spring thaw will come soon enough. Either it'll sink to the bottom, or," he didn't need to finish, "or it would be free again." "We can't just let it go," I argued. "If it's trapped, this is our chance. We have to do something." Roy gave me a long look. "You really think anything we do would make a difference? That thing survived who knows how long in these mountains. You think a bullet or a bomb or whatever else you're imagining would stop it?" He turned away. "Leave it be, Sheriff. Some things you just have to accept." But I couldn't accept it. Not after seeing Will Foster's mangled body. Not after learning how many others had died the same way. After Roy left, I stood on the ice for nearly an hour, staring down at the frozen creature, trying to formulate a plan. I could bring explosives. The county had some for clearing rock slides. I could organize a team, cut through the ice, haul the thing out before it thawed. But what then? Where would I take it? Who would I call? And what if Roy was right? What if trying to move it just woke it up? In the end, I did nothing. I roped off the area, posted signs warning of thin ice, and kept the location to myself. I told myself I was being cautious, responsible. But the truth was, I was afraid. Afraid of the thing beneath the ice, yes, but also afraid of what would happen if I brought it to light. If I forced my town to confront the monster it had been ignoring for generations. February passed. March arrived with warming temperatures and the first hints of spring. The ice on the lake began to thin, patches of open water appearing near the shore. I checked the spot daily, watching as the creature became more visible as the ice cleared, then less visible as the water darkened. By early April, the ice was gone completely. The lake's surface a sheet of cold, dark water that revealed nothing of what might lurk below. I kept waiting for reports. A sighting in the forest, another attack, something to indicate the thing was active again. But nothing came. The spring tourist season began, hikers and fishermen returning to Montrose, cabins filling up. The Blue Water Cafe bustling with activity. Life returned to normal. Or what passed for normal in a town with a secret like ours. April 15th marked my 12-year anniversary as Sheriff of Montrose. I'd planned to celebrate with a quiet dinner, maybe a drink at the town's only bar. Instead, I found myself sitting in my cruiser at the Old Ridge trailhead, staring up at the path where I'd found Will Foster's body. The trail closed signs had been removed the week before, the Forest Service deeming the danger past. Fresh footprints marked the dirt. New hikers already exploring the trail despite its history. They didn't know, couldn't know, and those who did know had chosen silence. As I sat there, Donna's words from months ago echoed in my mind. Every town has its price. Was this Montrose's? A sacrifice every few years to something ancient and unknowable? A pact of silence to protect the town's economy, its very existence? Could I be part of that? Could I stay here, knowing what I knew, waiting for the next victim? I put in my resignation the next day. Told the mayor it was time for a change, that 12 years was enough for any sheriff. He accepted without much question, already talking about who might replace me. I sold my house, packed what little I wanted to keep, and left Montrose 2 weeks later, found an apartment in Cincinnati, then a job in security at an office building. Nothing exciting, nothing dangerous, just normal people with normal problems. No forests, no mountains, no creatures watching from the shadows. But even now, years later, I think about Montrose, about the thing in the woods. I check the local news online sometimes, scanning for reports of missing hikers or unusual animal attacks. There have been a few, not many, but enough to make me wonder if it's still there. Still hunting. Last fall, there was a brief article about a tourist who'd gone missing on the Old Ridge Trail. The report said search parties found nothing, that the man had likely gotten lost, fallen in rough terrain. The local sheriff, my replacement, was quoted saying the mountains could be dangerous for the unprepared. I read between the lines, saw what wasn't being said. Sometimes I think about going back, about organizing a real hunt, with enough men and enough firepower to finally end whatever lives in those woods. But then I remember the way it moved, the unnatural speed and strength it possessed. I remember Roy's words about it being older than the town, perhaps older than human settlement in the area. And I wonder if some things truly can't be stopped, if some predators are simply part of the natural order. A reminder that for all our civilization, for all our technology and weapons, we are still, in some places, merely prey. I dream about it sometimes. Those nights I wake up sweating, convinced I can hear that low rumbling sound outside my window, that subsonic vibration that feels like a distant avalanche. But it's just city noise, traffic, construction, normal things. I tell myself that anyway, because the alternative, that it followed me, that it's here, watching and waiting, is too terrible to contemplate. So I keep my doors locked, my blinds drawn. I avoid parks after dark, wooded areas when I'm alone. Small precautions, probably unnecessary. Paranoia left over from my time in Montrose. But sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I swear I can hear it. That rumbling, that warning, and I wonder if anyone truly escapes the thing in the woods. I've always known these woods were alive. Not just in the way most people understand, with trees and animals and the natural cycles of life, but alive in ways that defy explanation. My grandfather, who gave me my Cherokee name, Adahi, meaning one who lives in the woods, understood this better than anyone. For 12 years, I've served as a ranger at Salagi National Forest, a sprawling wilderness in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The forest's official name on government maps is different, but our people have called it Salagi since before the white man's boots first disturbed these grounds. It's a place where mist clings to ancient pines until midday, and where shadows seem to move of their own accord. The radio crackled to life on my belt. Ranger Stevens, come in. The formal name, James Stevens, always felt foreign to me. I am Adahi to my family, to the elders, to myself. Stevens here, I replied, pressing the talk button with my thumb as I navigated a steep section of the trail. Morning dew still clung to the undergrowth, dampening my boots. We've got another missing persons report. Family of 4 this time. They were supposed to check in at Wheatwater Campground last night. Never showed. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. Any last known coordinates? They were hiking the Ridge Trail yesterday afternoon. Planned to camp at the Overlook. Weather was clear, and they're experienced hikers. The Ridge Trail? Again, the 3rd disappearance in that area this season. The first had been a solo hiker, a college student who'd gone off-trail to photograph wildlife. They found his backpack 2 weeks later, camera intact, with strange, blurry photos of something large moving between distant trees. The second was an older couple who'd been coming to these mountains for 30 years without incident. "I'll head that way now," I said. "Any search parties organized yet?" "County Rescue is assembling. ETA 90 minutes, you're closest." "Copy that. I'll check in when I reach the ridge." As I changed direction toward the ridge trail, my mind wandered to the stories my grandfather told around the fire when I was a child. Stories of Nunyanui, the stone man who stalked these forests, and of Kekla Kudla, the legendary hairy man of the mountains. Tourists and park officials dismissed these as quaint native folklore, but my grandfather's eyes always held something deeper when he spoke of them. A warning. The ridge trail was beautiful but treacherous. It followed an ancient pathway that my ancestors had used for centuries, winding along a granite ridge that offered spectacular views of the valley below. But it was remote, with steep drop-offs and dense forest on either side that could swallow a person whole if they strayed from the path. As I hiked, the forest grew unnaturally quiet. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush, just the sound of my own breathing and the crunch of my boots on the trail. Rangers develop a sixth sense for their territory, and something was off. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I found myself checking my sidearm more often than usual. I reached the designated overlook campsite by mid-morning. The family's tent was still there, zipped closed. Their cooking gear was arranged neatly beside a fire pit containing cold ashes. 4 backpacks leaned against a log. "Hello?" I called out. "Park ranger. Anyone here?" Nothing but the wind in the pines answered me. I approached the tent and called out again before unzipping it. Empty sleeping bags were arranged inside, alongside personal items. Everything appeared normal, except for the complete absence of people. Moving methodically, I examined the campsite. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no indication of animal intrusion. It was as if the family had simply vanished into thin air. The only unusual detail was a series of large, indistinct footprints at the edge of the clearing, leading into the dense forest, too large for a human, too shaped for a bear. I photographed them carefully before they could be disturbed, then followed them to the tree line. The forest beyond was old growth, untouched for centuries. Grandfather called it the sacred place, and warned me never to enter it alone. The radio crackled again. "Stevens, what's your status?" "I'm at the campsite. Family's gear is all here, but no sign of them. I've found some unusual tracks heading east into the old growth section." Static hissed before the reply came. "Wait for backup. County Rescue is en route." "Copy that," I said, but my eyes remained fixed on those massive humanoid footprints disappearing into the shadows. I've been a ranger long enough to follow protocol, but I've been Cherokee long enough to know when something unnatural is happening in our ancestral lands. I checked my watch. Still 45 minutes before backup would arrive. I couldn't shake the feeling that this family might not have that long to wait. The wind shifted, carrying a strange, musky odor from the direction of the tracks. An odor I couldn't identify. Not bear, not deer, not any animal I recognized from my years in these woods. Making my decision, I updated my coordinates in my GPS locator, checked my gear, and stepped off the trail. Protocol be damned. There were children missing. The old-growth forest swallowed me immediately. The canopy above was so dense that it created a perpetual twilight below. Moss-covered trunks wider than my truck stood like ancient sentinels. The tracks were clearer here in the soft earth. Huge, 5-toed imprints pressing deep into the ground. Whatever made them was heavy and walked on 2 legs. My grandfather's voice echoed in my memory. "The old ones still walk in the deepest woods. They were here before us and will remain when we are gone." 20 minutes into my tracking, I found the first sign of the missing family. A child's stuffed animal dropped beside a massive fallen tree. There was no blood, no sign of violence, just the abandoned toy lying there like a breadcrumb on a trail. The forest grew denser, darker, and I had to use my flashlight despite the morning hour. The tracks continued, now joined by smaller human footprints. The family, seemingly walking alongside the creature, not running, not dragged, just walking. That's when I heard it. A low rumbling sound that was neither growl nor speech, but something in between. It echoed through the trees, making it impossible to pinpoint the direction. My hand moved to my sidearm instinctively. From somewhere ahead came a child's laugh, quickly silenced. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small in the vastness of the ancient forest. "Park ranger. I'm here to help." Silence fell again, heavier than before. Then, a rustling of movement, something massive shifting through the undergrowth ahead. I raised my flashlight, and for an instant in the narrow beam, I caught a glimpse of something tall and broad-shouldered moving between the trees, something covered in dark hair that walked upright on 2 legs. In that moment, I knew my grandfather's stories weren't just legends. The old ones were real. and they had taken a family into the deepest part of our woods. The beam of my flashlight cut through the gloom, briefly illuminating the massive silhouette before it disappeared behind a stand of ancient hemlocks. My heart hammered against my ribs as I forced myself to move forward. 12 years as a ranger had taught me to respect these mountains and their dangers: bears, cougars, sudden storms that could strand the unprepared. But nothing in my training had prepared me for this. "This is Ranger Stevens," I whispered into my radio, keeping my voice low. "I'm approximately 2 miles east of the Ridge Trail overlook, tracking possible survivors and something else." Static answered me. I tried again, adjusting the frequency. Nothing. The old-growth forest had swallowed all signals. I was alone with whatever stalked these woods. The tracks continued deeper into a ravine where a small creek cut through the forest floor. The water ran clear over smooth stones, and beside it, I found another sign of the missing family, a man's boot print in the mud, alongside those larger, inhuman prints. They had stopped here, perhaps for water. A branch snapped somewhere ahead, and I froze, listening intently. The forest had gone silent again. No birds, no insects, as if every living thing was holding its breath. In the stillness, I could hear my own pulse throbbing in my ears. Moving as quietly as possible, I continued following the tracks. The ravine narrowed, the sides steepening until I was making my way through what amounted to a natural corridor of stone and earth. The tactical part of my brain screamed that I was walking into a natural trap. But the tracks led onward, and with them, my only hope of finding the missing family. The temperature dropped noticeably as I progressed. The summer heat that had made the higher trails uncomfortable couldn't penetrate this deep into the earth. My breath began to fog in front of my face, and I pulled my jacket closer around me. The narrow passage suddenly opened into a small clearing dominated by an enormous tulip poplar, the largest I'd ever seen. Its trunk must have been 12 feet in diameter, its lowest branches starting 50 feet up. At its base, nestled between massive roots, was what appeared to be an opening, a dark void leading beneath the tree, and surrounding that opening were dozens of items: a hiker's boot, a tattered backpack, a camera, a child's jacket, objects I recognized from missing persons reports over the years. This wasn't just about one family. This was a collection, a trophy pile. My blood ran cold as I cataloged the items with my flashlight. Some were relatively new. Others had clearly been exposed to the elements for years, perhaps decades, and beyond them, leading into that dark hollow beneath the tree, were fresh tracks, both the creatures and the families. The stories my grandfather told by firelight came rushing back. He spoke of the Kekla Kudla, the hairy man, who was said to take people into the deep caves of the mountains. Some versions of the legend said he ate them. Others claimed he kept them, turning them wild until they forgot their human lives. I drew my sidearm, checked that a round was chambered, and approached the opening. The musky odor I'd detected earlier was stronger here, mingled with the scent of damp earth and something else, something that reminded me of the bear den I'd once had to inspect after reports of poaching. "Hello?" I called into the darkness, my voice echoing slightly. "This is Park Ranger Stevens. I'm here to help." From within came a sound that made my skin crawl, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate the very air around me. It wasn't aggressive, exactly. It was territorial, a warning. I reached for my radio again out of habit, knowing it was useless. The search party would be at the campsite by now, but they wouldn't find my trail for hours. By then, it would be dark, and no one would risk these woods at night, not even for a missing ranger. I was on my own, standing at the threshold of what could very well be my own grave. Taking a deep breath, I clicked on my tactical flashlight, the most powerful one I carried, and ducked into the opening beneath the ancient tree. The passageway sloped downward, the ceiling low enough that I had to crouch. Tree roots formed a natural lattice above me, soil clinging to them and occasionally dropping onto my shoulders as I moved. The air grew colder, damper, and the smell stronger. After about 30 feet, the tunnel widened into a larger chamber. My flashlight beam couldn't reach the far walls, but what it did illuminate stopped me cold. Along one side of the chamber were crude shelters made of branches and leaves, and huddled inside one of them was the missing family, a man, a woman, and 2 children, perhaps 8 and 10 years old. They were alive, apparently unharmed, but their eyes reflected my flashlight with a wild, animal-like quality that sent chills down my spine. "I'm Ranger Stevens," I said, approaching slowly, keeping my voice calm and even. "I'm here to take you back." The man, I recognized him from the photo in the missing persons report, pulled his children closer and made a strange guttural sound. The woman bared her teeth slightly. "Mr. Kendall?" I tried again, remembering the family's name. "David Kendall? I'm with the Park Service. Your extended family reported you missing. Recognition flickered in the man's eyes, but it was distant, confused, as if I was reminding him of a dream he'd had long ago. How was this possible? They'd only been missing for a day. A low rumble from the shadows behind me answered my unspoken question. I whirled around, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness to illuminate a massive figure. It stood over 8 feet tall, its broad frame covered in thick, dark hair. Its face was a strange amalgamation of human and ape-like features, a prominent brow, deep-set eyes that reflected red in my light, a flattened nose, and a mouth that seemed capable of both bestial snarls and something approaching speech. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Keklakudla, the legendary creature of the deep woods stood before me, very real and very dangerous. I raised my weapon instinctively, but something stopped me from firing. Perhaps it was the lack of aggressive posturing from the creature, or perhaps it was something deeper, a sense that I was facing not just an animal but an ancient intelligence. It made that rumbling sound again, and to my shock, the Kendall family responded with similar vocalizations. A conversation was happening that I couldn't understand. "They need to come with me," I said firmly, addressing the creature directly. "They don't belong here." The creature tilted its massive head, studying me with eyes that held more understanding than should be possible. It took a step forward, into the full beam of my light, and I saw what I hadn't noticed before. Around its neck hung a crude pendant made of polished stone. It was carved with symbols I recognized from the oldest Cherokee petroglyphs, symbols that predated European contact. This wasn't just a wild creature of the woods. This was something that had existed alongside my ancestors, something that had been part of these mountains for countless generations. It raised one massive hand, fingers splayed, showing me an open palm. Not aggressive, but not yielding either. Behind me, David Kendall spoke, his voice hoarse and strange, as if he'd forgotten how to use it properly. "We stay," he said. "We belong now." His wife nodded, her eyes fixed on the creature with something approaching reverence. "No," I said firmly. "Your family is waiting for you. Your parents, your siblings. People are searching for you right now." The creature made another sound, and David shook his head violently. "Chosen," he said. "We, chosen." That's when I noticed the strange marks on their foreheads, patterns of what looked like mud or clay, forming symbols similar to those on the creature's pendant. Some kind of ritual had taken place here, something that had altered these people in ways I couldn't understand. The creature took another step toward me, and this time, I sensed no peace in its approach. I raised my weapon again. "I'm taking them back," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "They have a right to choose, but they need to be of sound mind to do it." The creature's eyes narrowed, and it bared teeth that could tear through flesh with frightening ease. It understood me. I was certain of it now, and it did not want to let its chosen ones go. Chapter 3. The Chosen Ones. Time seemed to stop as the creature and I faced each other in the dim chamber beneath the ancient tree. Behind me, the Kendall family huddled together, their eyes darting between me and the massive being that had, for reasons I couldn't comprehend, selected them. In my 12 years as a ranger, I'd faced down territorial bears, rescued climbers from near-death situations, and navigated these mountains in the worst conditions imaginable. But nothing had prepared me for this standoff with a legend come to life. "Mr. Kendall," I said, not taking my eyes off the creature. "I need you and your family to come toward me slowly." David Kendall made that strange guttural sound again, then struggled to form words. "No danger, no harm. Whatever's happening here, we need to discuss it above ground," I insisted. "Your family has rights, but this isn't the way." The creature let out a low rumble and took another step forward. I tensed, my finger hovering near the trigger of my sidearm. "Don't," David said, his voice clearer now, urgent. "He, protector, ancient one." The creature raised its massive hand again, this time pointing at my chest, then at its own. A gesture of equivalence, recognition. That's when it clicked. The pendant, the symbols, the reverence in the family's eyes. This wasn't a random abduction. This was something cultural, ritualistic. Something that perhaps stretched back to the time when my Cherokee ancestors first encountered these beings in the deep woods. I lowered my weapon slightly, but kept it ready. "I'm listening," I said to both David and the creature. "But I have a duty to bring this family back safely." The creature made a series of sounds, grunts and clicks that seemed to form a pattern. To my astonishment, Mrs. Kendall responded with similar sounds, then turned to me. "Chosen. Protectors," she said haltingly. "Forest. Dying. Need. Help." I struggled to understand. "You're saying this creature chose your family to help protect the forest?" She nodded emphatically, pointing to the strange markings on their foreheads. "Bond," she said. "Ancient. Bond. The creature moved again, this time retreating to the shadows of the chamber. It returned moments later, carrying something in its massive hands, an object wrapped in what appeared to be animal hide. With surprising gentleness, it placed the object on the ground between us and unwrapped it. Inside was a stone tablet covered in petroglyphs similar to those I'd seen in the oldest sacred sites of my tribe. But these were different, more detailed, showing human figures standing alongside taller, broader figures that could only be representatives of this creature's kind. David crawled forward, pointing at the tablet. "History," he said. "Your people, his people, together." I stared at the tablet, memories of my grandfather's stories rushing back. He'd spoken of the guardian spirits of the deep forest, beings that had taught the early Cherokee which plants could heal and which would kill, how to move through the mountains without disturbing their balance. "These petroglyphs," I said slowly, "they show cooperation between humans and your kind." I addressed this last part to the creature, who nodded its massive head once. Mrs. Kendall made another series of those strange sounds, and the creature responded. Then she looked at me. "Says, once, many human helpers, now, few, forest, sick." I looked around the chamber with new eyes. This wasn't a predator's den. It was a place of instruction, of initiation. The items outside weren't trophies. They were artifacts left behind by those who had been chosen before, perhaps over generations. "How many others?" I asked, gesturing to the crude shelters around the chamber. David held up 7 fingers. 7 families, many years, 7 other groups of people, chosen over what could be decades or even centuries, living in these woods as intermediaries between the creature's kind and humanity. It was almost impossible to believe, yet the evidence was before me. "And they stayed willingly?" I pressed. David and his wife exchanged glances. After understanding, yes, the implications were staggering. People who had been mourned as dead, as victims of the wilderness, were potentially living different lives entirely, serving as some kind of forest guardians alongside these legendary creatures. The creature made another series of sounds, more urgent now. Mrs. Kendall listened intently, then turned to me. "Says, others, coming. Your people. Danger. The search party. They would have followed my trail by now, perhaps even discovered the entrance to this underground chamber. And they would come armed, ready to confront whatever had taken a family and, now a ranger." "I need to go back up," I said. "I need to stop them before they find this place." The creature's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "I won't reveal your location," I promised, "but I need to report that I found the family safe." "Not safe," David said. "Chosen. Important." I took a deep breath. "Mr. Kendall, whatever's happening here, there are proper channels. Your family was reported missing. People are worried. They're searching for you right now." "No. Return," Mrs. Kendall said firmly. "Our purpose now." I looked at their children, who had remained silent throughout the exchange. They showed no signs of fear, no signs of distress. If anything, they seemed fascinated by the creature, watching its every move with wide, curious eyes. "The children deserve a choice," I said. "They deserve to grow up in the world they were born into, at least until they're old enough to decide for themselves." The creature made a low, mournful sound. Then, to my surprise, it reached out one massive hand and gently touched the head of the youngest child. The boy smiled up at it without fear. David spoke again, his words coming more easily now. "Children, special, see, truth. Adults, forget." A sound from the tunnel leading to the surface interrupted our strange dialogue. Voices, distant but drawing closer. The search party had found the entrance. The creature straightened to its full height, a growl building in its chest. The family huddled closer together, fear in their eyes for the first time. "Hide," I said quickly. "I'll speak to them." I moved toward the tunnel entrance, but before I could reach it, the creature grabbed my arm with surprising speed. Its grip was like iron, but it didn't hurt me. It stared into my eyes, and in that moment, I felt something pass between us, an understanding that went beyond words. It released me and made a series of gestures, pointing to the family, to itself, to me, and then upward, toward the surface. "He wants you, understand," David translated haltingly. "See, truth, then decide." "There's no time," I said, hearing the voices growing closer. The creature reached for its pendant and removed it from around its neck. It pressed the stone carving into my palm and closed my fingers around it. "Symbol," Mrs. Kendall explained. "Trust. Return, alone. Learn." I nodded, tucking the pendant into my pocket. "I'll come back," I promised. "But for now, stay hidden." The creature retreated into the shadows of the chamber, taking the family with it. I turned and hurried into the tunnel, meeting the search party halfway. "Stevens!" exclaimed Rodriguez, one of the county rescue team members. "Thank God. Did you find them?" I hesitated for just a moment. "No sign of the family in this direction," I lied. "Just some strange tracks that led me to this old root cellar, probably used by settlers a century ago." Rodriguez looked past me, his flashlight beam probing the darkness. "What's down there?" "Nothing but roots and dirt," I said. "I've been searching for hours. We should head back, regroup, try another direction." He seemed suspicious but nodded. "The rest of the team is checking the western ridge. Let's join them." As we climbed back to the surface, I felt the weight of the stone pendant in my pocket. I had just lied to a fellow rescue worker, violated every protocol I was sworn to uphold. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had glimpsed something profound in that underground chamber, something that connected to my heritage in ways I was only beginning to understand. The creature, the Quetzalcoatl of my grandfather's stories, was real, and it had chosen me as surely as it had chosen the Kendall family. That night, as the search continued in all the wrong places, I sat alone in my cabin, examining the pendant by lamplight. The symbols carved into its surface seemed to shift and change as I turned it, telling a story I could almost, but not quite, comprehend. Tomorrow, I would return to the ancient tree, alone, and I would learn the truth about the guardians of these mountains, whatever the cost. Dawn broke over the mountains, painting the mist-shrouded peaks in shades of gold and pink. I'd barely slept, my mind racing with everything I'd witnessed beneath the ancient tree. The stone pendant lay heavy in my palm as I sat on my cabin porch, watching the first light of day filter through the pines. My radio crackled to life. "Stevens, you copy? Meeting at base camp in 30. "Copy that," I responded automatically. I should have been preparing for another day of searching, a search I knew would be fruitless. Instead, I found myself tracing the strange symbols on the pendant, feeling an inexplicable connection to them. My grandfather had once told me that the old ways of knowing weren't lost, merely forgotten. "Our ancestors speak to us still," he'd said, "if only we remember how to listen." I closed my eyes, trying to listen with more than my ears. The forest around my cabin seemed to pulse with life, the chittering of squirrels, the songs of warblers, the whisper of wind through leaves. But beneath those familiar sounds was something else, something I'd never noticed before. A rhythm, like a heartbeat, emanating from the depths of the old-growth forest. My decision made itself. I'd called in to say I was checking a lead several miles from the actual search area, packed my gear, and headed back toward the ancient tree. The forest felt different today. Where yesterday it had seemed ominous and forbidding, today it felt aware, alive in a way that went beyond biology. I found myself noticing details I'd overlooked for years. The way certain trees grew in patterns that couldn't be coincidental, the way game trails converged at points that offered the best vantage of the valleys below. These weren't random features. They were designed, cultivated over generations by something that understood the forest as a single, living entity. As I approached the ravine leading to the ancient tree, I felt the pendant grow warm against my chest where I'd hung it on a leather cord. Not hot enough to burn, but noticeably warmer than body temperature. The entrance beneath the tree roots stood open, just as I'd left it. No sign remained of yesterday's search party. I'd made sure they marked this area as cleared. Taking a deep breath, I ducked into the opening and made my way down the earthen tunnel. The chamber beyond was empty. No sign of the Kendall family, no sign of the creature. But the shelters remained, and the stone tablet still lay where it had been placed. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing slightly in the underground space. I came back, as promised. Silence answered me. I approached the stone tablet, kneeling beside it to examine the petroglyphs more carefully in the beam of my flashlight. They told a story, that much was clear now. A story of first contact between my ancestors and the creatures of the deep forest. Some of the symbols matched those on ancient Cherokee artifacts I'd seen in museums, but others were entirely unknown to me. As I studied the tablet, I became aware of a presence behind me. I didn't hear it approach. A being that size moving without sound seemed impossible, but I felt it. A change in the air pressure of the chamber, the sense of being watched. I turned slowly to find the creature standing just beyond the reach of my light, its eyes reflecting red in the darkness. "I came back," I said, standing to face it. "I want to understand." The creature made that rumbling sound again, then stepped forward into the light. In daylight, filtered through the roots above, I could see details I'd missed the night before. Its face, while definitely not human, held expression and intelligence. Its hair wasn't uniformly dark but varied in color and texture across its body, and around its wrists were what appeared to be woven bands of plant fiber, deliberate adornment. This was no mere animal. This was a being with culture, with history. It gestured to the pendant I wore, then to itself. Yes, I said. I accepted your token. I came alone. It nodded once, then turned and moved toward the back of the chamber, clearly expecting me to follow. I hesitated only briefly before falling in step behind it. A narrow passage I hadn't noticed before led deeper underground. As we walked, I noticed symbols carved into the earthen walls, some fresh, others worn with age, generations of markings, a written record of sorts. The passage opened into another, larger chamber, and I stopped short at the threshold, my breath catching in my throat. The space beyond was illuminated by shafts of sunlight filtering through carefully constructed openings in the ceiling, and in that natural light stood the Kendall family alongside 7 other groups of people, the chosen ones David had mentioned. They ranged in age from children younger than the Kendalls to elderly individuals with weather-beaten faces and wild, white hair, and among them moved 3 more creatures, smaller than my guide, but unmistakably of the same kind. A family group, perhaps. They all turned to look at me as I entered, human and non-human alike. The expressions on the human faces ranged from curiosity to wariness to what appeared to be pity. An elderly man separated himself from the group and approached me. His clothes were tattered but had clearly once been modern hiking gear. Around his neck hung a pendant similar to mine. "You are Cherokee," he said, his voice rough from disuse but his words clear. "That is good. Your people remember, even if they do not know they remember." "Who are you?" I asked. "How long have you been down here?" He smiled, revealing surprisingly well-maintained teeth. Was, Dr. Thomas Blackwood, anthropologist, University of North Carolina. I came to these mountains in 1981 to study Cherokee petroglyphs. He gestured to the creatures. I found something much more significant. 1981. This man had been living underground with these creatures for over 40 years. The others? I asked, looking at the assembled group. Chosen over many years, he explained. Some recent, like the Kendall family. Others, he nodded toward an elderly couple, have been here since before my time. Chosen for what? I pressed. What's happening here? Dr. Blackwood exchanged glances with the large creature that had led me here. Some unspoken communication passed between them. "Walk with me," he said, leading me toward the center of the chamber where a pool of clear water reflected the sunlight from above. "What do you know of your Cherokee ancestors' relationship with these mountains?" "That they considered them sacred," I replied. "That they believed guardian spirits dwelled in the deepest forests." He nodded. "Not spirits. Guardians." He gestured to the creatures. "The Senegagwili, those who live apart. Your people knew them, respected them, learned from them." "Bigfoot," I said. "Sasquatch." Dr. Blackwood grimaced. "Crude names for beings that predate human civilization in these mountains. They were here first, Ranger Stevens, and they allowed us to stay, to learn, to become part of the forest cycle. Until colonization, I guessed." "Yes." As white settlers pushed into these lands, the Senegagwili retreated deeper into the mountains. The old agreements were forgotten, the balance shifted. He gestured to the pool, and I looked down into its clear depths. At first I saw only my own reflection. Then, something changed. The water seemed to ripple of its own accord, and images formed beneath its surface. Images of clear-cut mountainsides, polluted streams, dying wildlife. "The forest is dying," Dr. Blackwood said solemnly. "Not just here, but everywhere. The Senegagwili have maintained the balance for thousands of years, but they cannot do it alone anymore. They need intermediaries. People who understand the human world but are willing to learn the old ways." "The chosen ones," I said, understanding dawning. "But why take people against their will? Why not reach out openly?" One of the creatures, a smaller one with silver-streaked hair, approached the pool and made a series of complex vocalizations. Dr. Blackwood listened, then translated. "She asks if you believe your government would acknowledge their existence peacefully. Or would they be hunted, studied, confined?" I had no answer. I knew how the discovery of such beings would play out in the modern world. "The choosing is not random," Dr. Blackwood continued. "They watch. They select people who show respect for the forest, who have the capacity to understand what is at stake, and no one is kept against their true will." "The Kendalls seemed altered," I pointed out. "Not fully themselves. The bonding process is disorienting at first," he admitted. "The Senegagwili share their awareness of the forest, their way of sensing its rhythms, its needs. The human mind needs time to adjust to such perception." The large creature that had first encountered me made a deep, rumbling sound and placed one massive hand on my shoulder. Through my jacket I could feel the surprising warmth of its palm. "He says you were chosen long ago," Dr. Blackwood translated. "When you were a child, you camped with your grandfather in the Western Valley. You wandered away, became lost, Do you remember? Memory surfaced. One I had half convinced myself was a dream. I was 7 years old, separated from my grandfather during a camping trip. Night fell, and I was alone, terrified. Then, a large figure had found me, led me back toward my grandfather's campfire, vanishing before we reached it. That was real? I whispered. Dr. Blackwood nodded. You were marked then, watched. Your return to these mountains as a ranger was no coincidence. The weight of this revelation settled over me. I had been chosen long before I knew there was anything to be chosen for. What exactly are you asking of me? I asked, looking from Dr. Blackwood to the creatures. To disappear? To join you down here? No, he said. Your role is different. You walk in both worlds already, the world of humans and the world of the forest. You can serve as a bridge, a protector. Help us protect the chosen ones. Help us restore the balance before it's too late. And the Kendalls? The others? They stay here? For now. Until they learn. Until they can serve their purpose. I thought of the search parties combing the mountains, of families mourning loved ones presumed dead, of the Kendalls' extended family waiting for news. There has to be a better way, I said. People don't just disappear without consequences. Dr. Blackwood's expression darkened. We tried other approaches. In the 1960s, several Senegal-Gwili revealed themselves to scientists they believed they could trust. Those scientists were discredited, their evidence confiscated. One of the Senegal-Gwili was killed, his body taken to a government facility. The creatures around us made sounds of distress at this recounting. The modern world is not ready to acknowledge what it cannot control, Dr. Blackwood continued. But it may be ready to save what it loves, the wild places, the ancient forests. That can be done without revealing the Senegal-Gwili's existence. I looked around at the assembled humans and creatures, this strange secret community living beneath the ancient forest. Part of me wanted to reject everything I was hearing, to return to the surface and the comfortable certainties of my life. But the pendant hung heavy around my neck, and the memory of being saved as a child burned bright in my mind. What would I have to do? I asked finally. The largest creature approached, carrying another stone tablet. This one was marked with a map of the national forest, with certain areas highlighted by symbols I didn't recognize. Dr. Blackwood traced the markings with his finger. These are the sacred groves, the places where the forest's energy is strongest, where the Senegal-Gwili maintain the balance. They need protection. Your position as a ranger gives you influence over trail placement, camping regulations, conservation efforts. You want me to steer people away from these areas, I said, understanding, and to watch for those who might be chosen next, he added. To help ease their transition, to ensure they aren't simply declared missing and forgotten. It was so much to absorb, so much responsibility, and yet, looking into the intelligent eyes of these creatures, these first inhabitants of my ancestral lands, I felt a connection that transcended my modern skepticism. The largest Senegal-Gwili made that rumbling sound again, then spoke. Actually spoke in a deep, halting voice that seemed to come from its chest rather than its throat. Protect, forest. Protect, people. Protect us. I stared in shock. You can speak our language, Dr. Blackwood nodded. With difficulty. Their vocal structures are different, but they understand far more than they can say. The creature extended its massive hand toward me, palm up, waiting. In that moment, I stood at a crossroads between two worlds, the modern human world I had always known, and an ancient reality that had existed alongside it, unseen and unacknowledged. My decision would affect not just my life, but the lives of the chosen ones, the Senegal-Gwili, and perhaps the future of the forest itself. I thought of my grandfather's teachings, of the sacred responsibility to protect these lands that had been passed down through generations of my family, and I realized that this was not a new path at all, but the continuation of an ancient one. I placed my hand in the creature's open palm, feeling the rough texture of its skin against mine. I will help you, I said. I will protect the forest, the people, and your kind. But we do this my way. No more families disappearing without explanation. No more leaving loved ones to wonder and grieve. The creature's hand closed gently around mine, sealing our pact. And in that moment, beneath the ancient tree, I became what my ancestors had been centuries before. A bridge between worlds, a guardian of old knowledge, a protector of secrets that the modern world was not yet ready to hear. 6 months have passed since my encounter beneath the ancient tree. 6 months since I placed my hand in the massive palm of the Senegal-Gwili and accepted a responsibility that has transformed my understanding of these mountains and my place within them. Winter has settled over the forest, draping the pines in mantles of snow and ice. The tourist season has ended, leaving the wilderness to those who truly belong here. In this quiet season, I've had time to establish new patterns, new ways of fulfilling my dual roles as park ranger and guardian of ancient secrets. The Kendall family officially remains missing. The search was called off after 3 weeks of finding nothing but false leads and empty forest. I attended the memorial service in a small church in Asheville, watching their extended family mourn for people who were very much alive. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but I kept my promise to find a better way. 2 weeks ago, Mrs. Kendall's sister received an anonymous letter, postmarked from a town across the Canadian border. The letter explained that the family had chosen to start a new life away from the pressures of modern society, that they were safe and happy, and that perhaps, someday, they might return. Enclosed was a recent photograph of the family standing before a snow-covered landscape, their faces healthy and smiling. The letter was, of course, a carefully crafted fiction. The Kendalls remain in the mountains, learning from the Sanagogwili, gradually becoming part of that hidden community beneath the ancient tree. But the letter has given their family something they desperately needed: closure, and the fragile hope that their loved ones are still alive somewhere. Similar letters have been arranged for the families of other chosen ones, carefully staged to suggest new lives in remote locations rather than disappearances into the forest. It's not a perfect solution, but it's better than endless uncertainty. My own role has evolved in ways I never anticipated. On the surface, I remain Ranger James Stevens, dedicated protector of Tusalagi National Forest. I file my reports, I lead the occasional tour group, I enforce park regulations with the same diligence I always have. But my patrols now follow patterns dictated by more than Park Service protocols. I monitor the sacred groves marked on the Sanagogwili's stone map, ensuring that human intrusion remains minimal. I've advocated successfully for several conservation zones that restrict human access to the most sensitive areas, citing rare plant species or erosion concerns rather than the truth. And I watch for potential chosen ones, hikers and campers who show unusual reverence for the forest, who seem to sense something deeper in these mountains than mere recreation. I observe them from a distance, noting names and patterns, passing this information to Dr. Blackwood and the Sanagogwili during my regular visits beneath the ancient tree. Today is one such visit. As I approach the massive tulip poplar, snow crunching beneath my boots, I feel the familiar warmth of the pendant against my chest. It has become more than a symbol, it's a conduit of sorts, enhancing my awareness of the forest in ways I'm still learning to understand. The entrance beneath the roots is more concealed in winter, but my eyes know where to look. I clear away the light covering of snow and dead leaves, and slip into the earthen tunnel that has become as familiar to me as the trail to my own cabin. The chamber beyond is warmer than the forest above, the natural insulation of earth and root maintaining a temperature that remains comfortable even in the depths of winter. I'm expected, I always am these days. The Sanagogwili seem to sense my approach long before I arrive. Dr. Blackwood greets me at the entrance to the main chamber, his wild white beard now trimmed neatly, his posture more upright than when I first met him. Returning to regular contact with another ranger, another bridge between worlds, has rekindled something in the old anthropologist. Adahai, he says, using my Cherokee name as he always does in this place. Welcome. There have been developments. He leads me into the chamber where the pool reflects the winter sunlight from above. The Kendall children are there, helping one of the younger Sanagogwili sort through a collection of plants, learning the old knowledge of forest medicine that my ancestors once practiced. They look up and wave to me, their eyes clear and aware. The initial disorientation of their choosing is past, leaving them changed but fully conscious, fully themselves again. They've adapted to this strange dual existence faster than their parents, as children often do. The forest spoke last night, Dr. Blackwood says, his voice low. The eldest Sanagogwili had a vision among the hidden community. Such visions are treated with the utmost seriousness. The eldest Sanagogwili, a female with silver white hair and eyes that seem to contain the wisdom of centuries, rarely shares her insights with humans. When she does, it portends significant change. What did she see? I ask, feeling a flutter of apprehension. Strangers coming to the eastern valleys, he replies. Men with machines, seeking what lies beneath the earth. My heart sinks. I know immediately what this means. For months there have been rumors of mineral rights being investigated in the counties surrounding the national forest. The park itself is protected, but its boundaries are not immutable if valuable resources are discovered. Surveyors, I say. Prospectors. Dr. Blackwood nods grimly. The eldest believes they seek the rare earth elements that lie deep beneath the sacred groves, elements that have contributed to the unique properties of this forest for millennia. The implications are staggering. Mining operations even outside the official boundaries of the park could disrupt the ancient balance the Sanagogwili have maintained. The runoff alone could poison streams that feed the heart of the forest. What does she suggest we do? I ask. Before Dr. Blackwood can answer, a deep, rumbling voice speaks from the shadows of the chamber. Show truth to right people. The largest Senegogwili, the one I first encountered, whom I now know is called something that translates roughly to Riverstone, steps into the light. In the months since our first meeting, we've developed a connection that transcends the limitations of language, a mutual respect built on shared purpose. Show the truth, I repeat, uncertain. You mean, reveal your existence? Riverstone makes a negative gesture, not a human headshake, but his own equivalent. Not all, few, chosen, Dr. Blackwood clarifies. The eldest believes it's time to expand our circle of guardians, not just individuals who leave their old lives behind, but influential people who can return to the human world, carrying the knowledge of what must be protected. You're talking about showing yourselves to people who would have the power to stop the mining, I say, understanding dawning. Scientists, politicians, people with influence, carefully chosen, Dr. Blackwood emphasizes. People whose words carry weight, but who also have the wisdom to understand why some truths must remain hidden from the wider world. It's a dangerous proposition. Expanding the circle of knowledge always increases the risk of exposure. But I also understand the necessity. The traditional methods of protection, chosen ones living in seclusion, rangers like me subtly redirecting human activity, may not be enough to counter the threat of modern resource extraction. I know someone, I say after a moment of consideration. Dr. Eleanor Chen. She's an environmental scientist who's been studying the unique biodiversity of these mountains for years. She has connections in Washington, respect in the scientific community, and she has an unusual openness to possibilities beyond conventional understanding. Riverstone and Dr. Blackwood exchange glances. You trust this woman? Dr. Blackwood asks. With my life, I reply. And with your secret. Riverstone makes that rumbling sound that I've come to recognize as thoughtful consideration. Then he nods once, decisively. Bring her when snow melts. Spring. A time of renewal, of new beginnings, a fitting season to expand the circle of guardians. There will be others we need to bring in as well, I say, thinking aloud. People with different kinds of influence, a carefully constructed network, a return to the old ways, Dr. Blackwood says, a hint of wonder in his voice. When my ancestors first came to these mountains, they approached the indigenous peoples with arrogance, seeing only primitives living in harmony with nature. They never understood that this harmony was not simple, not accidental, but the result of ancient agreements with beings like the Senegogwili, guardians who taught humans how to live as part of the forest rather than its conquerors. Riverstone places his massive hand on my shoulder, the gesture that has become his way of conveying trust and solidarity. Protect, balance, he says. Together, as I prepare to return to the surface, to my cabin and my radio and the human world that still claims the majority of my time, I feel the weight of this new phase of our mission. The stakes have never been higher, not just for the Senegogwili and the chosen ones, but for the forest itself, for the delicate balance that has been maintained here since time immemorial. I think of my grandfather, of the stories he told by firelight, of the knowledge he passed to me that I only now truly understand. He knew, perhaps not everything, but enough to guide me toward this path, to prepare me for the role I now embrace. As I emerge from beneath the ancient tree into the winter twilight, snow begins to fall, large, soft flakes drifting down through the canopy. The forest is silent save for the gentle whisper of snow on pine needles. But in that silence I sense a presence, a watchfulness, an awareness that extends far beyond my limited human perception. The Senegogwili are out there, moving through their ancient territories. The chosen ones are learning the old ways beneath the earth. And I stand between these worlds, a guardian of secrets older than my nation, older perhaps than human civilization itself. I adjust my pack and begin the long hike back to my cabin, the pendant warm against my chest despite the winter chill. Above me the first stars appear in the darkening sky, the same stars that watched over these mountains when the first humans encountered the Senegogwili countless generations ago. Some would call the agreement we've renewed superstition, the product of primitive minds unable to comprehend the natural world through science. But I've seen enough now to know that the most primitive assumption of all is that humans are the only beings capable of consciousness, of culture, of stewardship. The truth is both simpler and more complex. We have never been alone in these forests, and our future depends on remembering how to share them. As the ranger who walks between worlds, as Adahai who lives in the woods, I have accepted this truth and the responsibility that comes with it. With spring will come new guardians, new challenges, new hopes for preserving the ancient balance. Until then, I watch, I protect, I remember, and in the deepest part of these mountains, beneath an ancient tree, the synagogue will remember too. I never wanted to be a park ranger in the first place. The irony wasn't lost on me as I stared at the assignment notice on my desk, the Forest Service letterhead gleaming under the fluorescent lights of the station, Blackwood National Forest. The name alone carried a certain weight, whispered among rangers with a mix of reverence and unease. "Congratulations," Park Superintendent Morris said, leaning against the doorframe of my cramped office. "Most rangers wait years for a post like this." I looked up from the notice, searching his weathered face for any hint of sarcasm. There was none, just the stolid expression of a man who'd spent 30 years managing the unmanageable, the vast wilderness preserves of the American West. "Why me?" I asked, gesturing to the paper. "I've barely been with the service for 2 years." Morris shrugged, his ranger uniform creasing at the shoulders. "Budget cuts, retirements, and frankly, you've got the right temperament for Blackwood." "Meaning?" "You don't scare easy, and you don't talk much." He straightened up. "Pack your gear, you head out tomorrow." After he left, I sat alone in the silence, contemplating the bizarre turn my life had taken. 3 years ago, I'd been teaching environmental science at a community college buried in student papers and bureaucracy. Now I was being sent to one of the most remote ranger stations in the country, nestled deep in the Blackwood National Forest, a place that had more folklore attached to it than actual visitors. That night, I packed efficiently, the way my father had taught me. Everything had its place: first aid kit, emergency radio, compass, maps, field guides. I hesitated over my personal journal, a habit I'd kept since childhood, before tucking it into my backpack. If nothing else, perhaps the isolation would give me time to write. The drive to Blackwood took nearly 6 hours, the landscape gradually transforming from suburban sprawl to rolling farmland, then to foothills, and finally to dense forest. The road narrowed, the pavement giving way to gravel, then to dirt. Cell service vanished 3 hours in. The ranger station appeared suddenly around a bend, a rustic wooden structure with a sloped roof and wide porch, surrounded by towering pines. It looked both welcoming and somehow forgotten, like a cabin in a fairy tale where time moved differently. A man stood on the porch, tall and lean, with a gray beard and ranger hat. He raised a hand in greeting as I pulled up. "You must be the new ranger," he called out. "I'm Jim Hollis." "Nice to meet you," I replied, climbing out of my vehicle. I know who you are," he interrupted, not unkindly. "We don't get many new faces up here." He gestured to the cabin. "Come on in. I'll brief you before I head out. My retirement's been a long time coming." Inside, the station was neat but dated. A large topographical map of Blackwood dominated one wall, dotted with colored pins. A radio system occupied a corner desk, alongside a computer that looked at least a decade old. "Dial-up internet," Jim explained, following my gaze. "Works about half the time. Radio's more reliable." He spent the next hour walking me through protocols, patrol routes, and the peculiarities of managing Blackwood. The forest covered nearly 400,000 acres, with only 3 maintained hiking trails and 1 campground. Most of it was designated wilderness. No vehicles, no development, not many visitors this time of year, Jim said, tracing a finger along one of the trails on the map. Mostly serious hikers and the occasional researcher. The university sends biology students sometimes. I nodded, taking mental notes. "And any particular areas I should focus on?" Something flickered across his face. Hesitation, perhaps. "The North Ridge gets the most traffic and—" He paused. "Stay away from Whispering Creek, especially at night." I raised an eyebrow. "Problem area? You could say that." Jim rubbed his beard. "Look, every forest has its stories. Blackwood has more than most. You'll hear them eventually." "I'm not much for ghost stories," I said. Jim's laugh held no humor. "Neither was I. Until I came here." He glanced at his watch. "I need to hit the road if I want to make it down the mountain before dark. The cabin's yours. Keys are in the top drawer. All the logbooks are up to date." Before leaving, he paused at the door. "One more thing. If you hear anything strange at night, voices, singing, anything like that, stay inside. Note it in the log, but don't investigate alone." With that cryptic warning, he was gone, leaving me alone in the sudden silence of the station. Through the window, I watched his truck disappear down the dirt road, dust rising in its wake. That night, as darkness settled over the forest, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, listening to the symphony of insects and the distant call of an owl. The stars emerged in breathtaking clarity, unchallenged by any artificial light for miles. I thought about Jim's warning and the stories that might have inspired it. Every wilderness had its legends, its cautionary tales designed to keep people alert and respectful. As a scientist by training, I'd always viewed such stories as cultural artifacts, interesting but ultimately explainable through rational means. Little did I know that Blackwood would soon challenge everything I thought I understood about the natural world and my place within it. My first week at Blackwood passed uneventfully. I patrolled the main trails, checked on the campground, empty save for one hardy couple from Montana, and familiarized myself with the topography. I maintained the logbook meticulously, noting weather conditions, wildlife sightings, and the occasional maintenance issue. Nothing unusual occurred, though I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched whenever I ventured into certain areas of the forest. I attributed this to normal adjustment to isolation, the human mind seeking patterns and presence where none existed. On the 8th day, that changed. I was patrolling the eastern boundary, where Blackwood adjoined private land. The trail there was overgrown, suggesting infrequent use. Around midday, I stopped by a small stream to eat lunch and check my maps. That's when I noticed the footprints. They crossed the stream about 20 yards upstream, large impressions in the soft mud of the bank. At first glance, they resembled bear tracks, but something was off about the shape and the stride length. I approached cautiously, camera in hand. The prints were roughly 15 inches long, with what appeared to be 5 digits, but the weight distribution was all wrong for a bear. They showed clear heel and arch marks, more human than animal, yet far too large for any person. Most strangely, they seemed to appear from nowhere on one bank and continue into the dense underbrush on the other side. I photographed them from multiple angles, then placed my own boot beside one for scale. My size 11 was dwarfed by the mysterious impression. I made detailed notes in my field journal, sketching the prints and recording the location coordinates. As I worked, the forest fell unnaturally silent. The birds stopped singing. The constant rustle of small animals in the underbrush ceased. Even the breeze seemed to hold its breath. I looked up from my notebook, suddenly aware of the silence. The hairs on the back of my neck rose. 20 yards away, just beyond the tree line, something moved. I caught only a glimpse, a dark shape, taller than a man, slipping behind a massive pine. For a split second I thought I saw eyes reflecting the midday sun, too high off the ground to belong to any recognized predator in these parts. "Hello?" I called, reaching slowly for the bear spray on my belt. "This is the Forest Service. Identify yourself." No response except the distant call of a raven, breaking the silence like a spell. Gradually, the forest sounds returned. A chickadee's call, the skitter of a squirrel, the soft sigh of wind through pine needles. I waited 15 minutes, alert and watchful, but whatever I'd seen didn't reappear. Eventually, I continued my patrol, but with a heightened awareness of my surroundings. That evening, I searched through the station's records for any similar reports. In a dusty file labeled Wildlife Observations, Unclassified, I found a thin folder containing incident reports spanning several decades. Most described unusual tracks or unexplained noises, but 3 reports from the 1990s detailed sightings of an unidentified bipedal creature in the eastern section of the forest, exactly where I'd been that day. The most detailed account came from a ranger named Peterson, who described an encounter in 1997 with what he called a figure approximately 8 feet tall, covered in dark hair or fur, moving upright through the trees with surprising agility. Peterson noted that after the sighting he experienced persistent headaches and unusual dreams for several weeks. I closed the file, unsettled. The rational part of my mind suggested a bear walking on hind legs, or perhaps an elaborate hoax by local teens. But another part, the part that had felt the weight of unseen eyes in the forest, wasn't so certain. That night, I dreamed of walking endless forest paths while something shadowed my steps, always just out of sight. I woke before dawn, drenched in sweat despite the cabin's chill. The next day brought rain, a steady downpour that limited my patrol to areas accessible by vehicle. I spent most of the afternoon at the station, catching up on paperwork and maintenance tasks. As evening approached, the rain slackened to a drizzle, and an unusual restlessness drove me back outside. I took a short trail that looped around the station, more a casual walk than a proper patrol. The forest smelled of wet earth and pine, the trees dripping softly in the gathering dusk. About half a mile from the station I stopped abruptly. There, hanging from a low branch, was a crude arrangement of twigs and forest debris, twisted into an unnatural shape that resembled a humanoid figure. It swayed slightly in the breeze, water droplets falling from its extremities. I approached cautiously. The construction was intricate, not something casually assembled by a hiker. Small bones, presumably from rodents or birds, had been woven into the structure. Most disturbing was the small pouch made of what appeared to be animal hide, hanging at the center of the figure. With gloved hands, I carefully untied the pouch. Inside was a small collection of objects: 3 smooth black stones, a rusted key, and a yellowed photograph, partially decayed with age and moisture. I could just make out the image of a young woman standing before what looked like the ranger station, though the background was too faded to be certain. I photographed the strange effigy, then removed it from the tree, placing it and its contents in an evidence bag. Whatever this was, art installation, prank, or something more sinister, it needed documentation. Back at the station, I made a detailed entry in the logbook, attaching the photographs. I tried the rusty key and various locks around the station, but it fit none of them. The photograph I examined under better light, but could discern no additional details beyond what I'd already observed. That night, the wind picked up, moaning through the trees surrounding the station. I found myself checking the locks twice before turning in, Jim's warning about strange sounds echoing in my mind. As I drifted toward sleep, I could have sworn I heard what sounded like singing. A woman's voice, distant and ethereal, carried on the wind. The melody was unlike anything I recognized, both beautiful and somehow wrong, as if the notes existed in spaces between the ones used in conventional music. I lay awake for hours, listening as the voice faded in and out with the gusting wind, never close enough to make out words, but persistent enough to keep sleep at bay until the early hours of morning. When I finally slept, I dreamed of following that voice through dark woods, toward a light that never grew closer no matter how fast I walked. 2 weeks into my assignment, I received my first emergency call. A hiker had failed to return from a day trip, and his concerned girlfriend had driven up to the station after being unable to reach him by cell phone, predictably, given the lack of service throughout most of the forest. The missing hiker, Kevin Brennan, 29, experienced but not expert, had set out at dawn to explore the area around Whispering Creek. Despite Jim's warning to avoid that area, it wasn't officially off limits, and the creek was marked on visitor maps as a point of interest. I gathered my search and rescue gear, first aid kit, extra water, emergency blanket, flares, and more substantial navigation tools than I typically carried on routine patrols. The girlfriend, Melissa, insisted on coming along despite my recommendation that she stay at the station. "I know Kevin," she said firmly, shouldering her own backpack. "If he's hurt, he might respond better to my voice than a stranger's." Her logic was sound, and she appeared well equipped for hiking, so I relented. We set out immediately, as daylight was already beginning to fade. The trail to Whispering Creek was well marked, but clearly less traveled than the main paths, with sections where undergrowth had begun to reclaim the trail edges. "Has Kevin hiked here before?" I asked as we walked. Melissa shook her head. "Not in Blackwood. We usually hike closer to the city. But he read about this place in some obscure hiking blog. Something about unusual rock formations and perfect acoustics at the creek." I frowned. Did he mention the name of this blog? Something pretentious. Paths Untraveled or Forgotten Trails. Something like that. We hiked in silence for a while, calling Kevin's name every few minutes. The forest grew denser as we approached the creek valley, the trees older and more massive, blocking much of the fading daylight. I switched on my flashlight as we descended a steep section of trail. "Listen," Melissa said suddenly, stopping in her tracks. "Do you hear that?" I paused, focusing my senses on the sounds of the forest. Beneath the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird, there was something else, a soft, continuous sound that might have been water flowing over stones, or might have been whispers just below the threshold of comprehension. "The creek," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We're getting close." The trail curved sharply downward, and suddenly we were in a narrow valley. Whispering Creek ran through its center, a modest stream no more than 10 feet across, flowing over smooth black stones. What made the place remarkable were the rock formations on either side, towering columns of dark stone that rose like sentinels, eroded into shapes that suggested figures frozen in stone. The acoustics were indeed unusual. The sound of the water seemed to amplify and echo in unexpected ways, creating an auditory illusion of whispered conversations that shifted as we moved. "Kevin!" Melissa called, her voice bouncing strangely among the rock formations. We followed the creek downstream, calling regularly and checking for any sign of the missing hiker. The light was fading rapidly now, the shadows between the stone columns growing deeper and more impenetrable. After about half a mile, I spotted something on the far bank, a flash of color against the dark stones. We crossed at a shallow point, the water icy cold around our boots. Kevin's backpack lay partially hidden between 2 rocks, its contents scattered as if it had been rifled through or dragged. His water bottle, smartphone, and energy bars were still there, but there was no sign of Kevin himself. "Kevin!" Melissa's voice held an edge of panic now. Where are you? I examined the area around the backpack, looking for tracks or any indication of which way he might have gone. The ground was mostly stone, yielding few clues, but I found traces of boot prints leading away from the creek, toward a narrow opening between two of the largest rock columns. Wait here with his things, I told Melissa, unclipping the radio from my belt. I'm going to check where these tracks lead. If you hear or see anything, use this. I handed her the radio and showed her the emergency channel. I'm coming with you, she insisted, but I shook my head. Standard procedure. If he's injured, one of us needs to stay with the coordinates while the other searches. I won't go far. Reluctantly, she agreed. I followed the boot prints through the narrow passage between the rock columns, my flashlight beam seeming to dim as I entered the shadow of the stones. The passage widened into a small clearing enclosed by rock on three sides. At its center stood what appeared to be the remains of a stone structure, not natural but clearly very old, with moss-covered blocks arranged in a rough circle. And there, sitting motionless on one of the fallen stones, was Kevin. Kevin Brennan. I approached cautiously. I'm with the Forest Service. Your girlfriend is looking for you. He didn't respond or turn. As I drew closer, I could see he was staring fixedly at something on the ground before him, his expression blank, lips moving slightly as if in silent conversation. Kevin? I reached for his shoulder. The moment I touched him, he startled violently, turning to me with eyes wide with fear or shock. You shouldn't be here, he said, his voice hoarse. They don't like visitors after dark. Who doesn't? I asked, maintaining a calm tone while quickly assessing him for injuries. Besides looking exhausted and disoriented, he seemed physically unharmed. The ones who sing in the water. He looked past me toward the passage. I heard them singing. I followed the voices here. They showed me things. Exposure and dehydration, I thought. Possibly hypoglycemia. Classic signs of wilderness disorientation. Your girlfriend is waiting, I said firmly, helping him to his feet. Let's get you back to her, and then out of the forest. He allowed me to lead him back through the passage, but kept looking over his shoulder, muttering about the singing ones and what they showed me. When we reached Melissa, her relief was palpable. She hugged him tightly, but he remained oddly passive. What happened, Kev? She asked, examining his face with concern. You look terrible. I heard singing, he said simply. I had to find where it was coming from. I gave her a warning look, shaking my head slightly to discourage further questions for now. We need to get back to the station before full dark. Can you walk, Kevin? He nodded vaguely. They said you'd come, the new guardian. I chose to ignore this cryptic statement, focusing instead on the practical task of getting us all safely back to the trail. I redistributed some of Kevin's gear between my pack and Melissa's to lighten his load, and we began the ascent out of the creek valley. The return journey took twice as long as our approach. Kevin moved slowly, stopping occasionally to listen to sounds only he seemed to hear. Several times he tried to turn back, claiming they were calling him. Melissa and I had to physically guide him forward. It was well past midnight when we finally reached the ranger station. I made Kevin drink water and eat some high-calorie energy bars while I called for medical assistance. Due to our remote location, the earliest a medical team could reach us would be morning. While Melissa helped Kevin clean up and change into dry clothes, I made detailed notes about the incident in the logbook. When I described the stone structure where I'd found Kevin, my pen hesitated over the page. There had been something else there, something I hadn't fully registered in my focus on the missing hiker. Markings on the stones, symbols carved into their surfaces, worn by time but still discernible. I sketched what I could remember. Curved lines intersecting in patterns that suggested a script of some kind, though not one I recognized. Later, when Kevin had been settled into the station's spare room and Melissa was sitting vigil beside him, I searched through the station's historical files again. In a folder labeled Archaeological Sites, Restricted, I found a faded report from 1962, describing an anomalous stone circle of unknown origin near Whispering Creek. The report included a rough sketch of the symbols I'd seen, with a note, similar to markings found at 3 other sites within Blackwood, possibly related to pre-Columbian native settlements, though no tribal records acknowledged these structures. Further investigation recommended. A handwritten note at the bottom, added in different ink, simply read, Investigation terminated by order of Regional Office, 10/17/1962. Sites to be left undisturbed and unmarked on public maps. I closed the file, my scientific curiosity now fully engaged. What had happened in 1962 to halt the investigation? And why keep these sites off the maps? Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying with it what might have been the distant sound of singing. I closed the window firmly and drew the curtains. trying to focus on my report rather than the growing sense that Blackwood held secrets far stranger than folk tales and campfire stories. The medical team arrived shortly after dawn, a young paramedic named Rivera and his assistant. They examined Kevin thoroughly, diagnosed him with mild hypothermia and dehydration, and recommended he be transported to the hospital in the nearest town for observation. Before they left, Rivera pulled me aside. "This isn't the first case like this we've seen from Blackwood," he said quietly. "Hikers found disoriented, talking about voices or singing." "How many cases?" I asked. "3 in the past year, all near that creek." He hesitated. "Look, I'm not supposed to say this officially, but maybe consider closing that area to hikers, at least temporarily." I nodded. "I'll look into it." After the ambulance departed with Kevin and Melissa, I returned to the station and drafted a formal request to the regional office for temporary closure of the Whispering Creek area, citing safety concerns. I made no mention of singing voices or ancient stone circles, focusing instead on the documented cases of hiker disorientation and the difficult terrain. With that task completed, I turned my attention to a more personal investigation. The station's attic contained archives going back to the establishment of Blackwood as a national forest in the 1930s. If I wanted to understand what I was dealing with, those records might hold valuable clues. The attic was dusty and cramped, with boxes and file cabinets arranged in no discernible order. I spent hours sorting through mundane reports of forest management, visitor statistics, and weather data before finding anything of interest. In a water-damaged box labeled "Personal Effects Unclaimed," I discovered a leather-bound journal. The name inside the cover was faded but legible: Margaret Chen, Field Researcher, Department of Anthropology, University of Washington, 1973-1974. The first entries detailed Dr. Chen's arrival at Blackwood to study what she called regional folklore concerning forest entities. She had been granted special access to the restricted archaeological sites based on her academic credentials. Her early notes were methodical and scholarly, recording local stories collected from towns surrounding the forest. As I read further, her entries became increasingly personal and disjointed. She described hearing singing at night and vivid dreams of walking forest paths that didn't exist on any map. By winter 1973, she was focusing exclusively on Whispering Creek and the stone structures nearby. A passage from January 1974 caught my attention. The symbols are not decorative but functional, a form of boundary marking or warning. Similar glyphs appear in disparate cultures worldwide, always associated with liminal spaces, thresholds between worlds. The singing intensifies when I attempt rubbings or photographs. Yesterday I discovered what appears to be a partial translation in the margin of a 19th century missionary's diary, found in the town archives. Beyond this stone walks not the flesh of man, but only his dreaming self. The final entry, dated February 18, 1974, was brief and troubling. "They have shown me the paths. I understand now why the Forest Service terminated the investigation. Some knowledge isn't meant for academic papers or government reports. Tonight I follow the singing to its source. If I don't return, know that it was by choice, not misadventure." The journal ended there. I searched the box for any additional papers or notes but found nothing. According to a faded incident report clipped to the inside back cover, Dr. Chen was reported missing on February 20, 1974. Despite an extensive search, no trace of her was ever found, except for her journal, discovered in her cabin at the ranger station. I closed the journal, deeply unsettled. The parallels to Kevin's experience were impossible to ignore. The singing, the disorientation, the strange compulsion to follow voices deeper into the forest. That afternoon, I received confirmation from the regional office approving the temporary closure of Whispering Creek. I spent the rest of the day posting closure notices at trailheads and updating the forest's limited website with the new restrictions. As dusk approached, I found myself drawn to the topographical map on the station wall. I traced the path to Whispering Creek with my finger, then noticed something odd: a faint pencil line continuing beyond the creek, into an area marked only as Wilderness Zone 14. The line meandered through unmarked terrain before ending at a small X. I cross-referenced this with the official Forest Service maps in the files. None showed any trail in that location. Only the wall map, which I now realized must have been annotated by hand at some point, indicated any path existed there. Could this be one of the paths Dr. Chen mentioned in her journal? A route not on official maps, but somehow known to whatever, or whoever, sang in the forest night? My scientific training warred with my growing sense that Blackwood operated according to rules not fully explained by conventional understanding. As a researcher, I'd always believed that persistent investigation could unravel any mystery. But as a ranger responsible for this forest and those who visited it, I needed to proceed with caution. That night, unable to sleep, I pulled out my personal journal and began documenting everything I'd experienced and discovered since arriving at Blackwood. If I was going to understand this place, I needed to approach it systematically, separating verifiable facts from speculation and folklore. As I wrote, the wind rose again, rattling the windows of the station, and with it came the singing, clearer now than before, a woman's voice weaving a melody that seemed to exist in the spaces between conventional notes. It rose and fell with the wind, sometimes seeming to come from the direction of the creek, sometimes from the deep forest behind the station, and sometimes from everywhere at once. Despite my resolve to remain analytical, I found myself moving to the window, drawn by the unearthly beauty of the sound. I caught myself with my hand on the door latch, ready to step outside and follow the voice into the darkness. I forced myself back to my desk, heart pounding. Whatever affected Kevin and Dr. Chen was affecting me too. I needed to maintain perspective, to remember that I was here to study and protect, not to become another mysterious disappearance in Blackwood's history. Yet even as I tried to focus on my notes, a part of me wondered, what lay at the end of that unmarked trail? What had Dr. Chen discovered that February night in 1974? And why did a part of me long to follow her path, despite all rational caution? The singing continued until dawn, keeping me in a state between wakefulness and dream, where the boundaries between what I knew and what I imagined began to blur like the edge of a forest, seen through morning mist. In the week following the Whispering Creek incident, I threw myself into routine ranger duties. Trail maintenance, campground checks, paperwork, anything to maintain a sense of normalcy and purpose. I kept the station radio tuned to the emergency channel at all times, and carried a satellite phone on patrols, determined not to lose contact like my predecessors. The singing continued each night, but I developed strategies to resist its pull. Earplugs, loud music, focused reading. Still, it infiltrated my dreams, where I walked strange paths through a version of Blackwood both familiar and profoundly altered. On the 8th day, I received a call from the hospital. Kevin Brennan had been released and was physically recovered, though he continued to report unusual dreams. More concerning, he had expressed a strong desire to return to Whispering Creek, a compulsion so intense that his doctors had prescribed mild sedatives. The call reinforced my decision to investigate further, but methodically and with proper precautions. If something in Blackwood was affecting visitors this way, I needed to understand it, for their safety and, increasingly, for my own peace of mind. I began by reviewing every file in the station related to unusual incidents, creating a map marking each documented occurrence. A pattern emerged. Most incidents clustered around Whispering Creek and 4 other locations, forming a rough pentagon across the forest. At each point, historical records mentioned stone structures similar to the one where I'd found Kevin. Cross-referencing with Dr. Chen's journal, I found she had visited at least 3 of these sites before her disappearance. Her notes suggested they formed a kind of boundary or threshold, though to what, she never clearly stated. Armed with this information, I prepared for a systematic exploration. I would visit each site in daylight, document it thoroughly, and return to the station before dusk. No matter what I discovered, I would maintain scientific objectivity and follow Forest Service safety protocols. I began with the site furthest from Whispering Creek, a location marked on my composite map as Ridge Stones. According to a 1957 geological survey, it contained unusual natural formations of potential archaeological interest. The hike took most of the morning, leading me through dense forest to a rocky outcropping overlooking a steep valley. There, partially concealed by vegetation, stood a semicircle of standing stones, similar to those at Whispering Creek, but larger and more deliberately arranged. I photographed the site meticulously, noting the same strange symbols carved into the stone surfaces. Unlike at Whispering Creek, there was no sense of disorientation or unease, just the ordinary sounds of the forest and my own measured breathing as I worked. Over the next 3 days, I visited the remaining sites, each with its own variation of the stone structures. At each location, I collected data, took photographs, and made detailed notes, always returning to the station well before nightfall. The 4th site, marked simply as Pool on old Forest Service maps, proved most illuminating. It centered around a small, perfectly circular pond of unusually clear water, surrounded by 7 standing stones. The symbols here were better preserved than at the other sites, and I recognized patterns that repeated across all locations. As I photographed the intricate carvings, my camera suddenly malfunctioned, the screen going black despite having full battery. At that same moment, I felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a drop in temperature, a change in the quality of light. Looking up from my camera, I noticed something I had somehow overlooked upon arrival. A narrow path leading away from the stone circle, into a section of forest that appeared darker and more dense than its surroundings. The path wasn't marked on any of my maps, yet it seemed well-defined, as if frequently traveled. The rational part of my mind advised immediate departure, return to the station, report my findings, wait for daylight to explore further. But another part, the part that had been listening to the singing each night, the part that recognized the symbols from my dreams, urged me forward. I compromised with myself. I would follow the path just far enough to determine its general direction, then mark it on my map for future investigation. I checked my watch, calculated the time until sunset, and set a strict turnaround deadline. The path wound through increasingly ancient trees, their massive trunks covered in moss and lichen. The forest floor was carpeted with ferns that seemed to glow with an inner light in the dappled sunshine. Birds called overhead, but their songs sounded distant and somehow altered, as if reaching me through water or thick glass. After walking for what my watch indicated was 15 minutes, I realized something unusual. The sun hadn't moved in the sky. The quality of light remained exactly as it had been when I entered the path. My watch continued to advance, but the forest itself seemed suspended in a permanent late afternoon. I should have turned back then. Every scientific and rational instinct urged caution. But the path ahead curved invitingly, and from somewhere beyond that curve came a sound I recognized instantly, the singing that had haunted my night since arriving at Blackwood. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding strangely flat in the still air. "Is someone there?" The singing paused, then resumed, somehow conveying an invitation without words. I continued forward, rounding the curve in the path. There, in a small clearing flooded with golden light, stood a woman. Her back was to me, her long dark hair falling loose over a simple white dress. She appeared to be writing or drawing in a notebook. "Excuse me," I said, approaching cautiously. "This area is currently restricted. I'm going to have to ask you to." She turned, and I stopped mid-sentence. Her face was familiar, though I couldn't immediately place it. She smiled, seemingly unsurprised by my presence. "You found my journal," she said, her voice the same one I'd been hearing in the night. "I knew you would." With sudden clarity, I recognized her. The same face as in the water-damaged photograph from the strange effigy, the same name written in the leather journal. Margaret Chen had been missing since 1974, yet here she stood, appearing no older than in her photograph from nearly 50 years ago. "Dr. Chen?" My voice sounded distant to my own ears. "How is this possible?" She gestured to the space around us. "Time moves differently on these paths. I've been here only moments by some measures, decades by others." She held up her notebook, and I recognized it as a continuation of the journal I'd found. "I've been waiting for you, the new guardian. There's so much to show you." "I don't understand," I said, struggling to maintain my grip on reality. "What is this place? What paths?" "Blackwood isn't just a forest," she explained, her eyes reflecting knowledge that seemed both ancient and immediate. "It's a threshold, a place where boundaries thin between worlds. The stones mark the gateways, the paths connect them, and the singing guides those who can hear it." "Guides them where?" I asked, though some part of me already knew the answer. "To the spaces between," she said, "to the other side of the threshold, to where I've been studying all these years." She held out her hand. "I can show you. You've already begun to see it in your dreams." I hesitated, acutely aware of standing at my own threshold, between rationality and wonder, between safety and discovery. The scientist in me demanded evidence, explanation, proof. But another part, perhaps the same part that had driven me from teaching into the wilderness, yearned to understand, to see what lay beyond the boundaries of conventional knowledge. "What about the others?" I asked. "The hikers who've been affected, like Kevin Brennan. What happens to them?" Dr. Chen's expression softened. "Not everyone is meant to cross the threshold. Some hear the singing but lack the preparation to understand what they're experiencing. It overwhelms them." She gestured toward the direction of Whispering Creek. "The stones aren't just markers. They're warnings. Protection for those who aren't ready." I took a step back, trying to process everything. "So you've been, what, living in some parallel version of Blackwood for 50 years? Time is fluid here," she said. "I've been researching, documenting encounters between our world and what lies beyond. There are entities not supernatural in the way folklore imagines, but existing according to different natural laws. They've been interacting with humans for millennia." She held up her journal. "I've recorded it all." The scientific part of my mind struggled to categorize what I was hearing. Interdimensional physics? Anthropological discovery? Hallucination? Yet the evidence stood before me. A woman who should be in her 70s if alive at all, looking exactly as she had in 1974, standing in a forest where time seemed to obey different rules. "Why me?" I asked finally. "You called me the new guardian. What does that mean?" "The forest chooses its own guardians," she said. People who can perceive the threshold without crossing it completely. Not everyone who works here can hear the singing or see the paths. But you can. She stepped closer. That's why you were assigned here. The previous guardian, Jim, recognized what you were when your application crossed his desk. This revelation stunned me. Had Jim deliberately selected me for reasons beyond my qualifications? Had he known what I would encounter here? The forest needs protection, Dr. Chen continued. Not just from human interference, but from misunderstanding. The entities beyond the threshold aren't malevolent, but they exist according to different rules. Interactions need supervision, and that's what you've been doing? Supervising these interactions? She nodded. Among other things, studying, recording, learning. Her eyes met mine with an intensity that was almost hypnotic. I can't leave now. I've gone too far beyond. But you still stand at the threshold. You can move between worlds, observe both sides, maintain the balance. The singing rose around us, no longer a single voice but a chorus, as if the forest itself was expressing approval of her words. The light in the clearing seemed to pulse with the melody. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed by the cascade of revelations and possibilities. Everything I thought I understood about natural law, about reality itself, was being challenged. Yet something about Dr. Chen's explanation resonated with what I'd been experiencing since arriving at Blackwood. The sense of being watched, the dreams of alternate paths, the pull of the singing in the night. When I opened my eyes again, the decision crystallized with surprising clarity. This was why I had left academia for the wilderness, not to escape complexity, but to encounter it in its purest form. To discover rather than merely teach, to experience rather than theorize. Show me, I said, reaching for her outstretched hand. Not to cross over completely, but to understand. If I'm to be this guardian, I need to know what I'm protecting, and from what. Dr. Chen smiled, and for a moment I thought I saw something shift in her appearance, a glimpse of the decades she had experienced in her own way. Wisdom accumulated across a lifetime of extraordinary research. Follow me, she said, turning toward a section of the clearing I hadn't noticed before. A place where the light bent strangely around what appeared to be an opening in the very fabric of the forest. I'll show you the boundary lands, where our world and theirs overlap. The entities call it the echoing wood. As we approached the shimmering boundary, the singing swelled around us. I felt both completely present in my body and somehow expanded beyond it, aware of Blackwood not just as a forest but as a living system of connections, visible and invisible, physical and metaphysical. For the first time since arriving, I understood what Jim had truly meant when he said every forest has its stories. Blackwoods weren't merely stories, but truths expressed in the only language humans had developed to describe encounters with the ineffable. Myth, legend, folklore. I stepped with Dr. Chen into the light, my scientific mind recording every sensation, my ranger's instincts alert to every detail, and my human curiosity embracing the wonder of standing at the threshold of discovery. The forest, both the Blackwood I knew and the echoing wood beyond, seemed to exhale around us, a sound indistinguishable from singing. 5 months have passed since my first crossing into the boundary lands with Dr. Chen. I continue my duties as Blackwood's ranger, maintaining trails, assisting visitors, and filing the expected reports with the regional office. On paper, nothing about my position appears extraordinary, but between these mundane responsibilities, I'll walk other paths. I've learned to navigate the threshold spaces, to recognize the signs of thinning boundaries, to hear the distinctions in the singing that indicate different entities moving between worlds. My journal has grown thick with observations, sketches, and accounts of encounters that defy conventional categorization. Dr. Chen remains my guide and colleague, though she rarely ventures back to what she calls the solid side. Her research continues deeper in the echoing wood, where time flows according to different patterns, and where entities whose nature I'm only beginning to comprehend share knowledge that predates human civilization. I've established new protocols for Blackwood, subtle interventions designed to keep unwary visitors away from active threshold points. The warning signs and trail closures appear entirely reasonable from a safety perspective, requiring no reference to the true nature of what they protect people from, or what they protect from people. Kevin Brennan has recovered fully, though he occasionally emails me about his persistent dreams of singing in the forest. I've learned to recognize those who, like him, have an innate sensitivity to the threshold without the capacity to comprehend it. For them, I've developed techniques to gently redirect their attention, to help them forget what they've glimpsed without trauma. Occasionally I encounter others like myself, people drawn to Blackwood because something in them resonates with its liminal nature. For them, I serve as Jim served for me, assessing, preparing, introducing them gradually to the truth. The regional office has noted increased visitor satisfaction and decreased safety incidents under my management, leading to commendations I accept with private amusement. If they only knew that the true measure of my success is how seamlessly I maintain the balance between worlds. Tonight, as I complete my daily log with its deliberately mundane account of trail conditions and wildlife sightings, I can hear the singing beginning beyond my window. Not a call to follow blindly into the unknown as I once feared, but an invitation to continued discovery, to deeper understanding of a universe far more complex and wondrous than my scientific training had prepared me to perceive. I close my logbook, open my journal, and prepare for another night of exploration along the paths between worlds. In becoming Blackwood's guardian, I haven't abandoned science, I've expanded its boundaries, just as the forest has expanded mine. The singing rises, and I answer its call. The sun was just beginning to dip below the treetops as I turned off the highway onto the unmarked dirt road. My old pickup bounced and rattled over the uneven surface, kicking up clouds of dust that billowed behind me. I cranked up the radio to drown out the unhealthy noises coming from the truck's aging engine. It had been a long drive from Albuquerque, and I was relieved to finally be reaching my destination, a remote cabin in the Sheila National Forest of southwestern New Mexico, where I had taken a temporary job as a fire lookout for the summer. The isolation and solitude of the assignment appealed to me. I was at a crossroads in my life and needed to get away, clear my head, and figure out my next steps. At 32 years old, it felt like one setback after another had led me to this point. I'd struggled to hold down a steady job ever since getting laid off from the automotive plant. The anxiety and depression I'd battled on and off since my teens had resurfaced with a vengeance. My girlfriend of 5 years left, unable to cope with my withdrawn moods and our evaporating savings. Rock bottom was a 2 a.m. call from the county jail to bail out my brother Leo after his third DUI. Again, if I couldn't get my own life together, how was I supposed to keep being the one my family leaned on? So when my old high school buddy Gabe mentioned that the Forestry Service needed someone to man the tower at Willow Creek for a couple months, I jumped at the chance to drop off the grid and get paid for it. Maybe a summer in the wilderness finding myself was just what I needed. The truck lurched as the road deteriorated into little more than 2 ruts winding through the trees. Ponderosa pines towered on either side, a dense thicket that blocked out the fading light and any signs of civilization. I consulted the rough map the Forest Service had mailed me. If I was reading it right, the cabin should be just ahead. I rounded a bend and there it was, a small log structure with a short tower on one end, barely visible in the shadows of the forest. I pulled to a stop, gravel crunching under the tires, and killed the engine. The sudden silence pressed down, a heavy stillness broken only by the ticking of the cooling motor. I grabbed my backpack and sleeping bag from the passenger seat and stepped out of the truck. The cabin looked old but solidly built, its weathered timbers blending into the woods around it. Willow Creek burbled nearby, the faint sound of running water drifting through the trees. I circled around to the front and climbed the 3 creaky steps to the porch. The door was unlocked, just as the service had said it would be. I shouldered it open and peered into the dimness inside, waiting for my eyes to adjust. A main room held a cot, a desk and chair, a wood stove, and some shelves with a few pieces of mismatched dishware. A ladder led up to the lookout nest, home sweet home for the next 2 months. I dropped my things on the cot, sending up a puff of dust, and headed back out to unload the rest of my gear from the truck. In multiple trips I lugged in boxes of canned food, extra clothes, my hiking boots, some books, and my grandfather's old hunting rifle. By the time I was done, full dark had fallen, the stuffy cabin illuminated only by the meager glow of my flashlight. I was exhausted from the long drive, but too jittery to sleep. I needed to walk off some energy, get my bearings, and breathe the cool night air. I pulled on a light jacket, slung the rifle over my shoulder out of habit more than any real concern, and headed out into the night. The darkness was absolute once I stepped away from the small circle of light cast by the open cabin door. No streetlights, passing headlights, or lit windows, just a thick, inky blackness that seemed to swallow sound as well as sight. I picked my way carefully through the trees, not wanting to venture too far until I learned the lay of the land in daylight. The narrow beam of my flashlight swept over the underbrush, briefly catching a pair of green eyes that vanished between the trees. Some small nocturnal creature, startled by my passage. I walked until I reached the burbling creek, then followed it upstream a short way, enjoying the way the rushing water broke the heavy silence. Tomorrow I would hike up to the ridge for a look around, get myself oriented, maybe even do a bit of exploring. But for now, this was enough. I was already starting to feel more settled, the stress of the last few months fading into the background. I cut back toward the cabin, looking forward to a good night's sleep, when a flicker of movement in the periphery of my vision made me stop short. Something pale, darting between the distant trees. I swung my light toward it, but saw only the black trunks and motionless leaves. Probably just a trick of the shadows. Get a grip, I chided myself. You're in the woods alone at night. Of course your mind is going to play. There it was again. Closer this time, just for an instant, but I was certain I saw it. Low to the ground, too large to be a rabbit or fox. Bipedal, and unnaturally pale. Every hair on my body stood on end. I raised the rifle to my shoulder, suddenly very glad to have its reassuring weight in my hands. "Hello," I called, hating the tremor in my voice. "Is someone there?" Silence. Even the crickets and frogs seemed to have gone quiet. My heart hammered in my throat as I scanned the trees, ready to pull the trigger at the slightest hint of a threat. Then, from the darkness just beyond the reach of my light, a voice. A raspy, sibilant whisper, the words strange and guttural, in no language I recognized. "Ana nahashi nidishanaki adi." I felt the blood drain from my face. My finger tightened on the trigger. I opened my mouth to yell, to threaten, to demand the hidden speakers show themselves, but terror choked the words in my throat. Then the night erupted in a cacophony of howls, one long undulating cry taken up and echoed by countless throats. Wolves. And close. Too close. I turned on my heel and ran. I didn't remember racing back to the cabin and barricading the door. I didn't remember jamming a chair under the handle, pressing my back against the rough wood, and sliding into a crouch as I hyperventilated, gulping air into lungs that felt bound with iron bands. The howling continued, the predatory chorus rising in pitch and volume, until it was all I could hear, all I could process. Then, as abruptly as the unearthly cries had started, they cut off, leaving a ringing silence in their wake. Fought to get my breathing back under control. Fought the urge to be sick on the unswept floorboards. What the hell was that? Not just the howls, but the figure in the woods? The one that whispered that gibberish right outside the range of my flashlight beam. Was any of it even real? Or were the shadows and isolation already playing tricks on my sleep-deprived mind? No. I knew what I had seen, what I had heard, and whatever it was, it sure as shit wasn't human. My hands shook as I groped in the dark for the heavy kerosene lantern I'd lugged in earlier. I needed light, and the inadequate flashlight still grasped in my white-knuckled hand wasn't cutting it anymore. I finally got the lantern lit, filling the small cabin with flickering yellow light and long, jumping shadows. I stumbled to the cot and collapsed on the sagging mattress, the rifle still clutched to my chest. I wanted to block the door with something heavy, but the only real furniture was the bed, desk, and chair. My breathing was starting to even out, my galloping pulse gradually slowing as the adrenaline drained away, leaving me clammy and nauseous. Was the thing out there some kind of animal? There were still wolves in this part of New Mexico, I knew. Even a few scattered reports of mountain lions, although those sightings were pretty rare. But those pale, gangly limbs moving through the underbrush, some kind of emaciated bear, maybe. Except bears ran on all fours, and this thing had looked like it was on two legs, or trying to be. Those strange, harsh words hissed from the darkness looped in my brain, over and over, an alien chant seared into my memory. I couldn't even begin to guess what language it was. Not Spanish, the only other one I had even a passing familiarity with. Maybe one of the local native dialects? Or was I just losing my goddamn grip on reality after too many hours on the road? A low, guttural whine dragged me out of my spiral. The hair stood up on the back of my neck as I slowly pivoted towards the door. Something was scratching softly at the weathered wood, moving up and down like long claws or bony fingers were dragging across the surface, or antlers. I raised the rifle, sighting it at the door with shaking hands. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice hoarse. "Show yourself." The scratching stopped. I held my breath, ears straining, an impossibly long, drawn-out moment of silence. Then a snuffling sound, like a beast scenting prey, and the creak of the old floorboards under a heavy weight. I braced for impact, for the door to splinter inward, for the nightmare to charge into the light, but the sounds moved away, receding into the night. I sagged in relief, all the strength draining from my limbs, but I didn't lower the rifle. I sank back onto the cot, every sense on high alert, jumping at every creak and rustle. I sat there until dawn, watching the gray light slowly seep through the cabin's single window, never taking my eyes off the door. When the banked terror finally loosened its hold enough for rational thought to filter back in, one thing crystallized in my mind with absolute, unshakable certainty. I needed to get the hell out of these woods. The old truck wouldn't start. Of course it wouldn't. After I left the damn thing idling for who knows how long last night before finally remembering to shut it off. Now the battery was dead and the sun climbing the sky as I yanked uselessly on the gear shift. muttering every swear word I could think of. There was no cell signal out here, no other way to call for help or let anyone know where I was. And walking out wasn't an option, not after what I'd seen, what I'd heard. I slammed my palms against the steering wheel in frustration, then froze. From outside the truck, carried on the morning breeze, came the echo of a distant scream, or not a scream, exactly. The high, terrified bleating of an animal in distress, and it was coming from the direction of the cabin. I swallowed hard, my hand going to the rifle on the passenger seat. Shit, I grabbed the gun and slid out of the truck, eyes scanning the sun-dappled forest. Everything looked so deceptively normal in the light of day, cheerful even, but every instinct was screaming at me to run, to put as much distance as possible between myself and whatever the hell was out there. The not scream sounded again, followed by a splintering crash from inside the cabin. I spat out a curse and took off at a run, unslinging the rifle as I pounded up the steps and shouldered through the half-open door and skidded to a shocked halt, the breath freezing in my lungs. The cot and desk were overturned, the shelves ripped out of the walls and spilling their contents across the floor. Claw marks gouged the wood, some of them stained with blood, and in the middle of the wreckage lay the mangled carcass of a deer. Its throat was torn out, its belly a gaping ruin of blood and viscera. The sightless eyes stared at me from its almost decapitated head. Thick ropes of saliva dripped from wolfish jaws. Not attached to any wolf I'd ever seen. The thing crouched over its grisly meal was canid in only the loosest sense, a twisted, elongated skeleton sheathed in pallid skin and patches of matted fur, almost humanoid, but grotesquely deformed. It swung its skull-like head towards me as I stumbled back against the doorframe, lips peeling back from jagged fangs in a snarl. Not a wolf, not a bear. I didn't know what this thing was, but it sure as hell wasn't any animal that belonged in this world. A choked sound that was half horror, half hysterical laughter clawed its way out of my throat. Because there was no way. This wasn't possible. I was losing my mind. That had to be it. What else could explain? The thing lunged. I had a split-second impression of grasping, misshapen forearms, of emaciated ribs and jutting vertebrae, before it slammed into me with the force of a battering ram. I went down hard, the back of my skull cracking against the floor. The world grayed out for a moment, and I clawed my way back to consciousness, to the sensation of fetid breath washing over my face, of a heavy, stinking weight crushing my chest, of teeth snapping inches from my throat as I wedged the rifle between us and shoved with every ounce of panic strength I possessed. The thing reared back, hissing. I sucked in a desperate lungful of air and rolled, somehow finding my feet. My hand scrabbled at my belt for my knife. A distant clinical part of my brain realized I must have dropped the gun when it tackled me, but there was no time to process that now. The thing whipped back towards me, milky eyes fixing on the blade. I had the distinct impression it was grinning, then it spoke. Nizoita, like father, like son. The words were mangled, barely recognizable, but I understood them. Ice flooded my veins. It knew me. Somehow, impossibly, this nightmare thing knew who I was, that I was Leo's brother, and that could only mean that thought, that horrible suspicion, was all the opening it needed. It launched itself at me, faster than anything that Twisted had a right to be. Talon-tipped fingers clawed for my eyes. I ducked, slashed wildly with the knife, felt it connect, felt skin split and something hot and black spatter my face. The creature screeched and sprang back, one flailing elbow catching me across the jaw and sending me reeling. And in that instant, in the frozen moment between one heartbeat and the next, the thing seemed to ripple, to blur around the edges. The gaunt, inhuman form wavering like a mirage, like something wearing a skin not its own. Then the moment shattered, and it was on me again, jaws gaping, howling in rage and hate and hunger. I brought the knife up, bracing for impact. The crack of a rifle shot split the air. The thing's head snapped back, a hole appearing between its eyes. Ichor sprang. It crumpled to the floor in a tangle of neck-snapped limbs. I stared wildly around the destroyed cabin, knife still raised. There, framed in the doorway, a smoking rifle clutched in his shaking hands, was Leo. His terrified eyes met mine over the spent weapon, wide and uncomprehending. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Eshki, he managed in a strangled whisper. What the fuck? Leo lowered the rifle slowly, like he expected the twisted body at our feet to spring back to life any second. That made two of us. Some distant, numb part of me wondered what the hell my brother was even doing here. Last I'd heard, he was still in county lockup awaiting trial for his latest DUI. I tore my eyes away from the thing, and let the hand holding my knife drop to my side. I was shaking all over, I realized dimly. I swallowed, tasting blood and bile. Leo, I croaked. How? What? The words wouldn't come. Nothing made sense. It was like the entire world had tilted on its axis, leaving nightmare logic in its wake. He picked his way through the splinters and gore littering the floor, skirting the dead thing in a wide arc until he reached my side. His face was white under the usual scruff, eyes hunted. I'd seen my brother scared plenty of times over the years, scared of our old man in one of his drunken rages, scared of the looming specter of jail time. But I'd never seen Leo scared like this. This was something deeper, something primal. The rifle barrel sagged as if he'd forgotten he was holding it. His free hand landed on my shoulder and gripped. Hard. Some ghostly echo of all the times he'd tried to shove me behind him when we were kids, and the threat of violence was in the air. "You okay?" His voice was hoarse, choked. I nodded mechanically. Okay was so far from what I was, it was almost laughable. But I was alive. At least there was that. "What is that thing, Leo?" The words came out small, lost. "What's happening?" He looked at the corpse, swallowed, looked away. "Not here. We need to go. Now." He scooped up my fallen rifle and shoved it into my numb hands. Started pulling me towards the door. I stumbled after him, my body operating on autopilot. The cool morning air hit my face as we stepped out into the too bright sun, and it was like being doused in icy water. I flinched, half expecting some fresh horror to come leaping out of the trees. But the woods were still, quiet. Leo hauled me over to a Jeep I didn't recognize parked haphazardly next to my dead truck. He ripped open the passenger side door and all but shoved me in, then ran around and vaulted behind the wheel. The engine roared to life, and then we were bouncing down the rutted access road, fleeing the cabin and its horrors behind us. I twisted around to stare out the back window, watching the nightmarish scene recede. "Leo, seriously? What the fuck?" "Not now," he snapped, hands white-knuckled on the wheel. "Just let me get us somewhere safe first. Then I'll explain everything." Safe. The word almost made me laugh again, teetering on the edge of hysteria. Was anywhere safe from that thing? From what it represented? We jounced around a switchback, the cabin vanishing behind a screen of trees. I faced forward again, tried to keep my eyes fixed on the winding dirt road ahead instead of my brother's ashen profile. Tried not to see the blood, my blood, splashed across the side of his face. I don't know how long we drove. The old mining roads that snaked through this part of the Gila twisted back on themselves, wending aimlessly to nowhere. By the time Leo finally slowed and pulled off into a small clearing, the sun had climbed to its apex, bathing everything in blinding, merciless light. He killed the engine and we sat for a long moment. The ticking of the cooling metal the only sound. The events of the last 12 hours felt surreal. Impossible, but the acrid tang of fierce sweat sticking my shirt to my back was real. The throb of the bruises and scrapes I'd collected was real. The blood drying on my hands was very, very real. Leo blew out a slow breath, then twisted to rummage behind the seats. He came up with a filthy towel and a first aid kit and started methodically cleaning and bandaging my wounds. His hands shook slightly as he worked, but his touch was gentle, careful. "Leo," I finally managed. My voice cracked. I'd bitten my tongue at some point, I realized. Swallowed blood. "What the hell is going on? What was that thing?" He sat back, not quite meeting my eyes. The rifle lay across his knees, his fingers light on the trigger guard. Like he was reassuring himself it was still there. "Something that shouldn't exist," he said quietly after a long moment. "Something wrong." He looked at me then, and the expression on his face made my stomach clench. "It's a skinwalker, Ash." The word slammed into me, drove the air from my lungs. Skinwalker. Yinald Lushi. The witches of Navajo legend, evil medicine men who could take the form of animals, twist them into something monstrous. But that was myth. Campfire stories to scare kids. Not something real, something solid enough to rip out a deer's throat. To attack me, to know my name. But even as I reeled, some part of me whispered that it was true. That on some gut-deep level I'd known. That hissed voice in the dark, speaking words I shouldn't have understood. "I'm watching you," in the old language. The same tongue my grandfather had used when he told us the stories of Coyote and the hero twins by the fire. Stories of skinwalkers loping through the night, hungering for human flesh. My fingers knotted in my shirt over my pounding heart. Questions clamored in my skull, but I forced them down. Made myself focus on the most immediate, the most urgent. "How did you know?" I asked hoarsely. "How did you know to come after me?" And because fear had sharpened me, let me see the shape of things that had been hidden. "What did you do, Leo?" An expression I couldn't read flickered across his face. Guilt, maybe, or something darker. He looked away, jaw clenching. "I didn't know," he said after a minute. "Not for sure, but I had a feeling." He huffed a humorless laugh. "A real bad feeling." I waited. The skin between my shoulder blades crawled. "I got out of county 2 days ago," he finally said. He was still avoiding my eyes. "Good behavior, overcrowding, whatever. I didn't ask questions. Just wanted to put it behind me, you know? Try to get my shit together." He scrubbed a hand over his stubbled face. "I went to see grandfather. Thought he might have some words of wisdom. One fuck up to another. Our grandfather Henry Blackwater was a good man. A medicine man. A healer. He'd tried his best with Leo and me growing up. Even though we were only a quarter Navajo on our mom's side and not born to the people. Tried to keep us connected to our roots, our heritage." We sat up late talking. Leo went on. He told me the skinwalkers were back." I stared at my brother. The crawling sensation intensified, icy fingers walking up my spine. "What do you mean, back?" "I mean back. Awake. When the uranium mines closed down all those years ago, a lot of the traditional barriers and warning signs were destroyed. A lot of the old warding ways were lost." His jaw worked. "The things that were buried there, trapped there, they got loose." My mind reeled. The old uranium mines that had operated all through the Grants mineral belt back in the 50s, poisoning the land and water, leaving behind radioactive tailings and gaping wounds in the earth, scars that would never heal, scars that ran deep through the Navajo Nation, scars that hid worse things than toxic waste, apparently. "Grandfather fought them when he was young," Leo said. "Learned the rituals, the prayers, the sacrifices to bind them again. But there was one he could never fully chain. One who knew how to hide from the cleansing, burrowing deeper and deeper into the dark." His eyes met mine, haunted. One who hungered more than the others. I thought of that pale, gangrel thing crouching over the deer in the cabin. The ruin of its face, the milky void of its eyes, the skeletal grin as it watched me scrabble for my knife. "It took one of his brothers," Leo whispered. "Took his shape for a while. Until grandfather drove it out, sent it fleeing into the night. But not before it swore vengeance. Not before it vowed to devour our bloodline to the last." His hands twisted together, white-knuckled. I watched him, numb. This was insane, impossible, except it wasn't, was it? I had the bruises, the terror sweat still trickling down my back. To prove it, grandfather bound it as best he could, Leo said. Drove it into the deep places, the dark places, and wove what wards he knew to hold it. It wasn't enough, but it was all he could do. All he could hope for was that it would sleep, maybe forever. He took a shaking breath, let it out. But it didn't sleep forever, Ash. It woke up. I licked my dry lips, found my voice. How long? 3 months. 3 months since it started stalking the res. 3 months of pets going missing, livestock mutilated, of people vanishing in the night, only to turn up days later with their throats torn out. I swallowed. That thing in the cabin had been strong, vicious, but it hadn't felt like the apex predator Leo was describing, a monster out of legend. It had felt lesser, somehow, like an echo of a deeper darkness, like a cub to a she-wolf. That wasn't the skinwalker, I said slowly. Realization was a lead weight in my chest. Was it? Leo looked at me. There was grief in his eyes, and a terrible knowing. No, he said softly. It wasn't. That was its get, its offspring, its child. And if it had come for me, specifically sought me out, then that could only mean, grandfather did a ritual, Leo said. Every word sounded like it was being dragged out of him. A way to see if the skinwalker's taint had taken hold in any of us, in the family. He swallowed convulsively. It showed him 2 things. You, alone in a dark wood, lost and afraid. And you, I finished. Cold certainty settled in my bones. It showed him you. He squeezed his eyes shut, nodded once jerkily. I went out to the res to clear my head, get my bearings. I don't know what I thought, that I could reason with it maybe. Make it understand that I didn't want. His voice cracked. I swear, Ash, I swear on our mother's grave, I never meant for this. I didn't know what it would do, what it was capable of, but I was putting the pieces together now, the fractured shards of my memory clicking into place. That final DUI, the night I'd gotten the call to come bail Leo out of county yet again. He'd been raving when I picked him up, eyes fever bright, words tumbling out of him in a barely coherent flood, begging me to believe him, begging me to run. I hadn't listened, hadn't wanted to listen. I'd been so damn tired, so sick of his bullshit excuses and lies. And when he'd grabbed me, fingers digging into my arms, a sudden rush of rage had surged up in me, vicious and hot. I'd shoved him away, heard his head crack against the cinder block wall. Only it hadn't been rage I'd felt in that moment. Had it? It had been something else. Something hungry. Something old and cruel. Scenting weakness. Opportunity. The thing that had always lived in my brother's shadow. Waiting. Watching. I met Leo's eyes. Saw my own horror reflected back at me. "It's not your fault," I said. The words were ashes in my mouth. You didn't know, but some part of him had. Some instinct beyond conscious thought had sent him tearing out of county lockup and halfway across the state, following a pull he couldn't name, trying to put himself between his little brother and the nightmare wearing his face, and I hadn't listened. "We have to stop it," I said. Determination steadied my voice, my hands. "We have to stop it, Leo. Before it hurts anyone else." Before I hurt anyone else, I didn't say. But he heard it anyway. "We will," he said. He reached out, gripped my shoulder. "I promise, Ash. We'll find a way." I nodded, tried to smile. It felt like a rictus grin stretching my face. "Well then, let's go hunting." We hiked. Leo had an old topo map of the Gila, its creases soft and worn from years of folding and unfolding. The skinwalker's territory was marked out in his crabbed handwriting, a loose circle of red pen centered on the old uranium mine, the place where it had first broken free. My brother took the lead as we trudged through the underbrush, following game trails and dry stream beds. I focused on putting one foot in front of the other, ignored the low simmer of anxiety in my gut. Out here in the bright of day, away from the immediate memory of blood and screaming, it was almost possible to convince myself that this was just another backcountry campout. Just two brothers on a hike, a perfectly normal excursion, except for the rifles slung over our shoulders and the knives at our belts. Except for the way Leo would freeze at every snap twig, every rustle of leaves, his hand twitching towards the gun, except for the certainty sinking lid-heavy into my bones with every step. The thing stalking these woods, the thing that had spawned the pale mockery currently cooling on the cabin floor, it knew we were coming for it. It was waiting for us. For me, I didn't have words for the dread that gripped me every time that thought surfaced, cold and inexorable as the tide. It wasn't just fear of the creature itself, of the ancient hunger and malice that wrote its bones. It was fear of the part of me that called to that hunger, the part that wanted to sink into it, drown in it, become it. I shoved those thoughts down deep and locked them away, focused on the weight of the rifle in my hands, the crunch of dry leaves under my boots, the sun beating down on the back of my neck as it arced across the cloudless sky. We walked, time stretched and warped, the minutes bleeding together. My shirt was soaked with sweat sticking to my back. I was just about to call for a water break when Leo held up a closed fist. "Halt." I stumbled to a stop, heart suddenly pounding against my ribs. He stood utterly still, head cocked, listening. I strained my ears past the drum of my own pulse but heard nothing. No bird calls, no insect buzz. The forest was preternaturally hushed. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. And then, drifting on that breathless stillness, a distant scream. Every hair on my body stood on end. It was a woman's scream, high and shrill with terror. And it was coming from directly ahead of us, from the direction of the mine. Leo shot me a look, lips pressed into a bloodless line. I nodded once, sharply. We moved, the scream cut off as abruptly as a snapped thread, but neither of us slowed our headlong rush. Low branches whipped at my face, snatched at my clothes. I batted them away, barely feeling the sting of the cuts they left behind. My blood roared in my ears, narrowing my vision to a tunnel. We burst into a small clearing and then jerked to a halt, panting. I could see the black mouth of the mine up ahead, a wound in the earth ringed by scrub grass and tumbled rocks. And there, at the edge of that abyss, a crumpled figure, face down, limbs askew, not moving. Leo raised his rifle to his shoulder, sighting down the barrel. I slid my knife from its sheath, gripping it in a sweat-slick hand. "Help me." The words drifted to us on the dead air, soft and wavering. "Lost." "Please." The figure stirred, pushed itself up on trembling arms. A curtain of dark hair fell away from a pale, blood-streaked face. A girl, no more than 20, wearing clothes that had been clawed to ribbons. She stared at us with huge, haunted eyes, her breath coming in shallow pants. "Please," she whispered again. Fresh blood dripped from the torn skin of her throat. I took a half-step forward. Leo grabbed my arm, hard. "Wait," he breathed. "Something's not right." I shot him an incredulous look. Of course something wasn't right. There was an injured girl bleeding out in front of us. We had to help her. I froze. Ice trickled down my spine as realization crashed over me. Not a girl. Bait. The thing burst from the mine entrance in a blur of motion, a lupine shape of knotted muscle and matted fur. No, not lupine. Something more, something worse. Its body twisted and reshaped by the unnatural energy thrumming through it. Jaws that split back too far, exposing rows of jagged teeth. Limbs too long, too fluid, tipped with serrated claws that gouged furrows in the rocky soil. It threw back its head and screamed, an ululating cry that shattered the air like glass. And as the sound reached me, something deep in my brain lit up in response, a match set to a pool of gasoline. Hunger roared through me, vicious and bottomless, and for a vertigo instant I saw the world through its eyes. Prey. Threat. Food. Hate. Kill. I staggered back, my vision shifting and blurring at the edges. The skinwalker's scream echoed in my skull, brutal and deafening. I felt my lips peel back from my teeth in a feral snarl, my fingers twisting into claws. Ash! Leo's shout cut through the fog, snapped me back to myself. I blinked, saw his stricken face swim into focus. The girl, the thing that looked like a girl, was grinning, its smile stretched too wide, the skin splitting at the corners to show the black gums underneath. "Welcome home, little brother," it said in a voice like old leaves skittering over stone. "We've been waiting for you." Bile rose in my throat. I wanted to scream, to weep, to claw the tainted blood from my veins. But there was no time, no space for any of that, because the skinwalker was lunging, its bulk hurtling across the clearing faster than anything that size had a right to move. Leo fired. The report was deafening in the hushed woods, the muzzle flash briefly painting the creature's snarling face in hellish light. It didn't slow, didn't falter. If anything, the bullet seemed to enrage it. It bunched its haunches and sprang, a nightmare-given fang and sinew and claw. I had a panicked instant to register how huge it was, how utterly outmatched we were, before it slammed into my brother with the force of a freight train. They went down in a thrashing tangle, the rifle spinning away into the underbrush. The thing that had been a girl was laughing, a crazed gurgling sound, black blood foaming over its chin. I wrenched my knife free of its sheath, launched myself at the skinwalker's heaving back. Dimly heard Leo's pain shout, felt the wet snap of breaking bone as they rolled across the rocky ground. Then I was on it, somehow astride it, my blade sinking into the thick ruff of its neck. It screamed, convulsed, threw me like a rag doll. I hit the ground hard, fetched up against a deadfall with an impact that drove the air from my lungs. Through the gray haze filming my vision, I saw the skinwalker rear back from Leo's prone form. Saw my brother's blood sheeting its muzzle, saw it turn its head, slowly, until that awful crimson gaze found me, pinned me like an insect. Its shoulders bunched, its jaws opened. I scrabbled for my dropped knife, my shaking fingers closing on empty air. I was going to die here, I realized with a numb sort of clarity. I was going to die, and then that thing wearing my face was going to shuck its stolen skin and walk out of these woods wearing mine. The skinwalker growled, a low curdling sound that vibrated in my bones. Took one step towards me. Another. Behind it, unseen, Leo dragged himself up onto his knees. His face was a mask of blood, his left arm hanging at a grotesque angle, but his right hand closed on the fallen rifle, his split lip pulling back from bloody teeth in a rictus snarl. The skinwalker lunged. I braced for the impact, for the feel of its teeth in my throat, and Leo fired. The bullet took the creature in the side of its skull, punching through hide and bone in a spray of gore. It staggered, its head whipping around, jaws snapping at empty air. Leo fired again. Again. 3 holes bloomed in the matted fur of its chest, weeping sluggish runnels of blackish blood. It took 1 step, 2, snarled through a ruined throat, then slowly, so slowly it toppled, fell like a felled tree, and lay still. The crumpled thing that had been a girl wasn't smiling anymore. It made a choked, gargling sound, convulsed once. Then it too went limp, the light fading from its filming eyes. Silence. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. I stared at the bodies, my heart a jackhammer against my ribs, waiting for them to twitch, to rise, to turn on us with renewed savagery. But they stayed dead, cooling and leaking their black ichor into the thirsty soil. It was over. We'd won, and all I could think was, what now? What did winning even mean, when the evil had already sunk its hooks into my very blood and bones? When I could feel it coiled there still, cold and patient, waiting for me to stumble, to fall. I didn't realize I was weeping until Leo's good arm came around my shoulders, until he grunted in pain as he pulled me close against his side. I buried my face in his jacket, breathed in the familiar scent of sweat and leather and the copper tang of blood. "It's all right," he said hoarsely. He squeezed me tight, ignoring the wet snap as his broken arm shifted. "We're all right, Ash. It's finished." But I knew better. Knew it in the marrow of my bones, in the chill hollow behind my eyes that still yearned towards spilled blood and screaming. The skinwalker was dead. Its get were dead. But the sickness they carried, the gnawing hunger that had burrowed into my core and nested there, claws sunk deep into the secret meat of my heart that would never be finished, would never let me rest, never grant me peace. I could feel it even now, rattling against the cage of my ribs, waiting, watching, whispering in the dark. The radio crackled to life in my small cabin, breaking the comfortable silence of early morning. Ranger Station 17, do you copy? Over. I set down my coffee mug and reached for the transmitter. 5 years as a park ranger in Olympic National Forest had taught me that unexpected calls at 5 a.m. rarely brought good news. This is Ranger Station 17. I copy. Over. We've got a missing hiker. College student, male, 22. Separated from his group yesterday afternoon near Blackwater Ridge. They reported him missing after he failed to return to camp by nightfall. Search team assembling at Junction Point. Can you assist? Over. Copy that. I'll gear up and head to Junction in 30. Over and out. I sighed, glancing at the worn copy of The Wendigo by Algernon Blackwood sitting on my nightstand. An old folklore professor had given it to me before I took this job, saying with an unsettling smile, "There's truth in these pages for those who work in the deep woods." At the time, I'd laughed it off. I wasn't laughing anymore. There's something about spending years in the wilderness that changes a person. The forest has its own heartbeat, its own consciousness. Most visitors never sense it. They come and go too quickly, making too much noise, seeing nothing but trees and trails. But when you live here, when you learn to move quietly and observe, you start to notice things that don't fit neatly into ranger training manuals. As I packed my gear, my mind drifted to a Reddit thread I'd stumbled across months ago. It was buried in Eras Torpix Rangers, not the usual place for the unexplained. I've been a ranger for 12 years in the PNW. There are things in these woods that science can't explain. I've found footprints 3 times the size of a man's. I've heard vocalizations that made my blood run cold. Not a wolf, not a bear, not anything cataloged. And twice now, I've felt something watching me. Something intelligent, something waiting. The locals call it Sasquatch. I don't know what it is, but I know it's real. The post had hundreds of comments, many from other rangers sharing similar experiences. I'd closed the browser, disturbed not by the content, but by how eerily familiar it all sounded. Slinging my pack over my shoulder, I grabbed my rifle, standard issue for predator defense, and headed for my truck. The sky was just beginning to lighten, painting the surrounding pines in shades of deep blue. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. Junction Point was a 90-minute drive along winding Forest Service roads. As I navigated the familiar route, my mind ran through search and rescue protocols. Find the last known location, look for signs of passage, call out, listen, track. The process was methodical, well-established, but Blackwater Ridge had a reputation among rangers. Hikers disappeared there more frequently than in other areas of similar size and terrain. Equipment malfunctioned without explanation. Compasses spun wildly. GPS signals dropped. Even experienced backpackers reported becoming disoriented, turning around only to find themselves deeper in unfamiliar territory. The official explanation was magnetic anomalies in the underlying rock formations. That's what we told tourists and reporters. Among ourselves, we had other theories. As I approached Junction Point, I spotted the gathering of vehicles. 2 other ranger trucks, a county sheriff's SUV, and 3 volunteer search and rescue vehicles. Standard procedure for a missing person. What wasn't standard was the palpable tension in the air as I stepped out of my truck. The sheriff's deputy, a veteran named Rodriguez, was speaking quietly to the lead SR coordinator. Both looked unusually grim. "What aren't you telling me?" I asked, approaching them. Rodriguez glanced around before speaking. "The missing kid's friends, they heard screaming last night, not animal sounds, human, and something else they couldn't identify. And this morning, about 2 miles from their campsite, we found a boot. Just one. Torn off, looks like. Blood on it." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "Mountain lion?" Rodriguez's expression told me he didn't believe that any more than I did. "Maybe. But the tracks around it, they don't match any predator in these woods." I nodded slowly, keeping my face neutral. "Let's focus on finding this kid. Whatever happened, we deal with facts, not speculation." As our search party prepared to move out, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched from the dense tree line. I glanced up at the towering pines, their tops disappearing into the morning mist. Something was waiting for us in there. I could feel it. The search grid took us deep into Blackwater Ridge territory. 6 teams, each assigned different segments, all in radio contact. The protocol was thorough, designed to cover maximum ground while ensuring no one else went missing. I was paired with a SARE volunteer named Mika, an experienced wilderness guide with 3 years of search operations under her belt. "You've been quiet," she observed as we followed a faint game trail heading northeast from the lost hiker's last known position. "Just focused," I replied, scanning the underbrush for any sign of human passage. Broken twigs, disturbed leaves, anything out of the ordinary. But the forest floor told no clear story, which was unusual in itself. A panicked hiker typically leaves obvious traces. By midday, we'd covered nearly 4 miles of difficult terrain without finding a single clue. The radio occasionally crackled with updates from other teams, all negative. "I've done dozens of these searches," Mika said during a water break. "Something feels off about this one." I nodded, grateful she'd said it first. "The forest is too quiet." It was true. The typical background symphony of a healthy forest, birdsong, rustling leaves, distant woodpeckers, was notably absent. We were moving through a space that felt hollowed out, expectant. As we prepared to continue, I noticed Mika staring at something on a nearby pine tree. "What is it?" She pointed to a mark about 7 feet up the trunk, a deep gouge in the bark. "Bear sign." I approached to examine it. 4 parallel slashes, each about an inch deep in the living wood. "Too high for a black bear," I said, "and not the right pattern for a grizzly." "Mountain lion?" I traced the marks with my fingers, feeling an inexplicable sense of dread. No cat I've ever tracked leaves marks like these. We shared a look but said nothing more. What was there to say? That these were claw marks from something taller than a human? Something powerful enough to carve through thick pine bark like it was butter? We pressed on, and I couldn't help but notice we were both walking faster, checking our surroundings more frequently. The forest had changed us in the span of a single observation. An hour later, we found the first concrete evidence of our missing hiker. A water bottle, half empty, lying beside a fallen log. The location made no sense. It was well off any established trail, in a direction opposite from where the student's friend said he'd headed. "Why would he come this way?" Mika wondered aloud, picking up the bottle carefully by its edges. The standard procedure was to preserve potential evidence. "He wouldn't," I said quietly. "Not voluntarily." I radioed our find to the command post and updated our coordinates. While Mika documented the discovery, I circled the area, looking for tracks or signs of struggle. 20 yards further, I found something that stopped me cold, a single footprint pressed deep into a patch of soft earth. But not a hiking boot or running shoe. This was a bare footprint, or something that resembled one, nearly 18 inches long and proportionally wide. The impression was clear enough to make out what looked like toes, but the shape was just wrong. Too splayed, too powerful looking. I'd spent my entire career identifying animal tracks. This matched nothing in my experience. A memory surfaced. A story shared around a campfire during my first year as a ranger. An old-timer had described finding tracks like these after 3 hunters vanished in 1978. "The thing about finding Sasquatch prints," he'd said, his weathered face serious in the firelight, "is that by the time you see them, it's already seen you." I felt eyes on my back and turned slowly, scanning the trees. Nothing moved, yet the sensation persisted. A prickling awareness of being observed. The radio at my hip crackled, making me jump. "Team 3, this is command. We're getting reports of severe weather moving in fast. All teams pull back to Junction Point immediately. Repeat, all teams evacuate the search area." I looked up. The sky visible through the canopy had darkened dramatically. How had I not noticed? "Command, this is Team 3. We've found evidence of our missing person. Request permission to continue." "Negative, Team 3. Satellite shows an unprecedented system. Flash flood warnings in effect. Return immediately." I frowned. Flash floods in this terrain were rare but deadly serious. "Copy that. Team 3 returning to base." As we packed up, I took one last look at the massive footprint. Without thinking, I snapped a quick photo with my phone. Evidence, I told myself, though for what I wasn't sure. The return journey felt longer, more arduous. The temperature had dropped 15 degrees in less than an hour. The wind picked up, bending the tops of towering pines like they were saplings. "We need to move faster," I told Mika, eyeing the darkening sky. But something made me hesitate, turning back toward the deeper forest. Through the trees, just at the edge of visibility, I thought I saw movement. Something large, upright, keeping pace with us from a distance. "Did you see that?" I asked, pointing. Mika squinted into the shadows. "See what?" I stared a moment longer. Nothing moved now except wind-tossed branches. "Never mind. Let's go." As we hurried back toward Junction Point, the first fat raindrops began to fall. Thunder rolled across the mountains, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the storm wasn't the only thing following us out of the deep woods. The storm hit with unexpected ferocity. By the time all search teams had returned to Junction Point, visibility was down to 30 feet and creek beds were already swelling with runoff from the higher elevations. The search for the missing student was officially suspended until weather conditions improved. Back at my cabin that evening, I sat at my desk reviewing the day's findings. Outside, rain lashed against the windows as wind howled through the towering pines surrounding my small outpost. These storms always made the forest feel even more isolated, cutting me off from the rest of the world. I connected my phone to my laptop and transferred the photo of the strange footprint. On the larger screen, details emerged that I hadn't noticed in the field. The toes weren't just splayed, they showed clear evidence of opposable joints, almost like a massive, primitive hand, and embedded in the mud beside the print was a tuft of dark hair, something I'd completely missed. Standing, I moved to the bookshelves that lined one wall of my cabin. 5 years of solitary posting had given me plenty of time for reading, and I developed a particular interest in regional folklore and unexplained phenomena. Not something I advertised to my colleagues, but living alone in the wilderness changes your perspective on what's possible. I pulled down a worn volume titled Cryptids of the Northwest and flipped to the chapter on Sasquatch encounters. The book contained several photographs of alleged footprint casts, some dating back to the 1950s. Placing these images next to my laptop screen, the similarities were undeniable. My phone buzzed with a text message from Rodriguez. "Call me. Private." I dialed immediately. "I'm sending you something," he said without preamble when he answered. "Check your email in 5 minutes. Don't share this with anyone else." True to his word, an email arrived containing a video file. The footage, clearly taken from a body camera, showed a section of forest floor with several rangers and SAR personnel examining something. The camera moved closer, revealing a disturbing scene. A large area where the underbrush had been completely flattened, forming what looked like a crude nest. In the center lay a backpack, torn open, its contents scattered, and strips of fabric that had once been a jacket. "Where was this?" I asked when I called Rodriguez back. "Team 5 found it about 3 miles southeast of where you discovered the water bottle. They were the last to return to base before the storm hit." And the blood. A pause. "Lab says it's human. Type matches our missing student." I processed this information staring at the frozen image on my screen. "What aren't you telling me?" Rodriguez sighed heavily. "The backpack was 20 feet up in a tree before it was brought down. And that clearing? Those saplings weren't broken by wind or falling branches. They were twisted, literally wrenched apart by something with enormous strength." My mind flashed to the claw marks Mika and I had found. "What does the official report say?" "Bear attack. That's what's going in the file." "We both know that's not what happened." Another long pause. "Listen, I've been doing this job for 22 years. I know what bear sign looks like. This was something else." I thought of the Reddit posts I'd read, the stories shared privately among rangers. "They found tracks?" "Yeah. Similar to what you photographed, but partially degraded by the rain. Large bipedal, stride length over 4 feet. The implications hung in the air between us, unspoken but understood. Something was out there in our forest, something that had taken a human being, something that the official reports would never acknowledge." "The search resumes tomorrow?" I asked. "Weather permitting. But management is already calling it a recovery operation, not a rescue." After ending the call, I returned to my research with renewed urgency. Beyond the mainstream cryptozoology books, I had collected first-hand accounts from locals, including tribal elders from the indigenous communities whose ancestors had inhabited these forests for thousands of years. One narrative in particular caught my attention. A file labeled Interview with Joseph Sky Eagle, 1997. Sky Eagle, a tribal elder who had passed away in 2004, had shared stories about what his people called the Watchers in the Woods. "They have always been here," he was quoted saying. "Guardians of the deep forest. They mean no harm if left alone, but they fiercely protect their territories. When people vanish in these woods, it is often because they have crossed boundaries they cannot see, sacred spaces where humans are not welcome." I continued reading. "The young men of my grandfather's generation would sometimes leave offerings at the edge of these territories. Tobacco, food, handcrafted items, a sign of respect. Those who showed respect were sometimes allowed to glimpse the Watchers from a distance. Those who showed disrespect or ignorance of the old ways, some never returned." Outside, a particularly violent gust of wind slammed against my cabin, causing the lights to flicker momentarily. I moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. Rain continued to pour in sheets, visibility reduced to just a few yards beyond my porch. For a moment I thought I saw something move at the edge of the tree line. A large, dark shape passing between trunks. I strained to see better, fogging the glass with my breath. Nothing but rain and darkness. But when I stepped back, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Among the dozens of books and papers scattered across my desk was a tribal map I'd been given years ago, showing the traditional territories and sacred sites within what was now the National Forest. There, marked clearly in faded ink, was a boundary line labeled in the native language. The rough translation: "The realm of the tall ones. Enter at your own peril." That boundary ran directly through Blackwater Ridge, precisely where our missing hiker had disappeared. As I stood contemplating this revelation, my cabin was suddenly plunged into darkness as the power failed completely. In the new silence, with the electric hum of the building gone, I could hear the forest more clearly, and something else, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. A long, low howl that was neither wolf nor coyote nor any animal I could identify. It echoed through the mountains, somehow audible even over the raging storm. I reached for my flashlight and weapon, moving away from the window. The search would resume tomorrow. But tonight, something was watching my cabin. I could feel it. Dawn broke with eerie stillness after the night's ferocious storm. The forest dripped with leftover rain, fog hanging between the trees like cotton wool. I'd barely slept, spending most of the night alternating between reviewing my research and standing watch at the windows. As I prepared to join the search teams, my satellite phone rang. The emergency line used only for urgent ranger business. "This is Station 17, I answered. "We've got another missing person." Rodriguez's voice came through, tight with tension. "One of the SAR volunteers didn't report in this morning, Mika Chin." My stomach dropped. "Mika? But she returned to base with me yesterday. According to the log, she went back out after the storm let up around midnight. Said she wanted to check something at your previous location while the rain had washed away most other tracks." I cursed under my breath. Going solo against protocol was unacceptable even for experienced personnel. "Her last radio check was at 100 hours, Rodriguez continued. "Nothing since. I'll head straight to our previous coordinates," I said, already gathering additional gear. "Send me her last known position." 20 minutes later, I was driving through mud-slicked Forest Service roads toward Blackwater Ridge. The usual search protocols had been suspended. With one of our own missing, we were sending everyone available into the field immediately. I parked at the closest access point and continued on foot, moving swiftly but carefully through the sodden undergrowth. The forest felt different in the aftermath of the storm, more alive somehow, watchful. Water droplets fell from branches with rhythmic persistence, creating a background percussion that masked other sounds. Following my GPS, I approached the coordinates where Mika and I had discovered the strange footprint. The area looked transformed by the heavy rainfall, depressions filled with water, new channels cut through what had been solid ground. "Mika," I called, listening intently for any response. Only forest sounds answered, the drip of water, distant bird calls resuming after the storm. I worked outward in a spiral pattern from our original discovery site. After 30 minutes of methodical searching, I found the first sign of Mika's return visit, a small orange flag marker she must have placed, the kind we use to tag evidence locations. Following the direction it indicated, I discovered 2 more flags forming a line deeper into the forest, away from any established trail. The final flag stood beside what appeared to be a game trail, except it wasn't one I recognized from yesterday's search. The path, if it could be called that, was a tunnel-like opening through dense underbrush, branches broken at a height of about 7 feet, far too tall for deer or elk. The ground showed signs of recent passage, with mud disturbed in a pattern consistent with large, bipedal footprints. This was what Mika had found, a trail left by whatever had made the footprint we discovered. I hesitated, weighing my options. Protocol demanded I radio in, wait for backup, but Mika was out there somewhere, potentially injured, or worse. I keyed my radio. "This is Ranger Station 17. I've found evidence of Mika Chen's passage following an unidentified trail at these coordinates. I'm pursuing cautiously. Request backup." After receiving confirmation, I unholstered my sidearm and proceeded down the trail, moving as quietly as possible despite the wet conditions. The path wound deeper into old-growth forest, areas rarely visited even by experienced hikers. The trees here were ancient, massive trunks reaching skyward, creating a cathedral-like space with limited undergrowth. About half a mile in, I found Mika's headlamp, broken on the ground beside what was unmistakably a fresh print, identical to the one we'd photographed yesterday, but even more clearly defined in the mud. I knelt to examine it, noting the incredible depth of the impression. Whatever made this mark weighed hundreds of pounds. The sound made me freeze, a subtle crack of a branch from somewhere ahead. I rose slowly, scanning the forest with practiced eyes. There, perhaps 50 yards ahead, partially obscured by a massive cedar trunk, stood something that defied immediate categorization. Tall, easily 7 to 8 feet, with a broad silhouette covered in dark hair or fur. The figure remained mostly hidden, but I could make out what appeared to be a massive shoulder and part of a head that sat directly on those shoulders. No neck visible. I stood perfectly still, hardly breathing. Neither of us moved for what felt like minutes. Then it shifted slightly, and I caught a glimpse of eyes watching me. Intelligent eyes set deep in a face that seemed both ape-like and disturbingly human. Lowering my weapon slowly, I recalled Joseph Sky Eagle's words about respect. This was their territory. I was the intruder here. Very deliberately, I reached into my pocket and removed a protein bar, the closest thing I had to an offering. I placed it on a nearby stone, then took 3 steps backward, maintaining eye contact. The figure didn't move, but I sensed a shift in its posture, a slight relaxing. "I'm looking for my friend," I said quietly, keeping my voice even. "The woman who was with me yesterday. She came this way last night." For a moment I felt ridiculous talking to what many would dismiss as a forest shadow or bear. But something told me this entity understood. If not my words, then my intent. The figure shifted again and then, astonishingly, raised an enormous arm and pointed deeper into the forest, before melting back into the shadows with surprising grace for something so large. Heart pounding, I waited several minutes before cautiously advancing in the indicated direction. The trail widened, showing signs of regular use, a highway for whatever creatures inhabited these deep woods. 20 minutes later, I emerged into a small clearing and finally found Mika, alive but injured, propped against a tree with her legs splinted using branches and strips torn from her own jacket. "About time someone showed up," she said weakly, attempting a smile. I rushed to her side, checking her vital signs. "What happened?" "Fell into a ravine chasing evidence." She winced as I examined her clearly broken leg. "Stupid rookie mistake. But then, something pulled me out, carried me here." I looked around the clearing, noting the crude but effective splint. "Something?" Mika's eyes met mine, a mixture of fear and wonder. "You know what I'm talking about. You've sensed it too." "It was massive, strong, could have killed me easily, but instead, it helped me." I nodded slowly, glancing back toward the forest path. "Did it hurt the missing hiker?" Her expression darkened. "I don't think so. Not directly. I found this before I fell." She handed me a waterproof camera from her pocket. "There's another search team out there, not ours. Armed men. They've been hunting in the restricted zones." I scrolled through the photos, clear images of camouflage-clad men carrying high-powered rifles and what appeared to be tranquilizer guns. "Poachers?" I asked. "Not for deer," Mika replied. "I overheard them. They're after proof, physical evidence of Sasquatch. They followed the student when he accidentally wandered into territory they were surveilling." The implications hit me immediately. The student hadn't been taken by the creature. He'd likely been injured or killed in the poachers' pursuit of their real target. As I radioed for medical evacuation for Mika, I couldn't shake the image of those intelligent eyes watching me from the shadows. This forest held secrets that defied conventional explanation, secrets that some would kill to expose, while others had learned to respect through generations of coexistence. The ancient guardians of these woods weren't the monsters. We were. The rescue helicopter touched down in a meadow half a mile from where I'd found Mika. As the medical team stabilized her for transport, I pulled Rodriguez aside, showing him the camera and explaining what she'd told me. "Unauthorized hunting party," I said, keeping my voice low. "They followed the student into restricted territory, probably caused his disappearance." Rodriguez examined the photos, his expression grim. "These aren't ordinary poachers. Look at their gear, military-grade equipment, tactical formation. This is an organized operation." He was right. The men captured in Mika's photographs moved with precision that suggested professional training. Their weapons weren't standard hunting rifles but specialized equipment, including what appeared to be tracking devices and capture nets. "I need to find these men," I said. "They're the key to locating our missing student." Rodriguez looked skeptical. "You want to track an armed paramilitary group through remote wilderness? Alone? They don't know these woods like I do," I replied. "And I have a feeling they've stirred up something they can't handle." After Mika was safely evacuated, I convinced Rodriguez to let me continue alone while he coordinated with state authorities. The official search teams would focus on areas where the missing student might have fled, while I would pursue the unauthorized hunting party. Following Mika's coordinates, I headed deeper into the restricted zone, areas designated off-limits to visitors due to environmental sensitivity. The truth was more complex. These were the regions where unexplained phenomena occurred with the greatest frequency, where ranger patrols reported equipment malfunctions and disorienting experiences. The locals called them thin places, where the boundary between our world and something else grew permeable. The hunters had left an obvious trail, their heavy boots carving deep impressions in the mud. They were moving fast, no longer concerned with stealth. Something had changed in their mission parameters. By mid-afternoon, I began finding discarded equipment, a broken GPS unit, an abandoned backpack containing technical gear, a high-end thermal imaging camera smashed against a rock. Whatever expedition these men had planned was unraveling rapidly. I found the first body an hour later. A man in his 30s wearing tactical gear, lying face down beside a fallen log. No visible injuries, no sign of animal attack. His expression, frozen in death, was one of absolute terror. My radio crackled to life. Station 17. This is command. We've located the missing student. Repeat, we've found Micah Turner, alive. Relief flooded through me. Copy that. Condition, dehydrated, minor injuries, severe disorientation. Claims he got lost trying to escape armed men who were tracking something in the forest. Did he see what they were tracking? A pause. Negative. But he heard it. Says the men were all taken, one by one. Command is requesting you return to base immediately. I looked down at the dead man, then at the trail continuing deeper into the forest, where 3 more armed hunters might still be operating, or being hunted. Negative, Command. I've located one deceased individual, approximately 6 miles into Sector 12. Military type, heavily armed. There may be others. I need to continue. That's a direct order to return, Ranger. Whatever's happening out there is now a federal matter. FBI and state police are en route. I switched off my radio, knowing I was violating protocol but unable to walk away. These men had invaded sacred ground, disrupted an ancient balance, and somewhere in these woods, the Guardians were responding. The trail led to a rocky outcropping overlooking a small valley. Below, nestled among ancient trees, I could make out what appeared to be stone structures. Not modern constructions, but something far older. Monolithic formations arranged in patterns that seemed deliberate, weathered by centuries of exposure. As I carefully descended toward the valley floor, I found evidence of the hunting party's final stand. Spent shell casings, torn equipment, signs of desperate flight, and blood. A lot of blood, but still no bodies. The stone formations grew more imposing as I approached. They formed a rough circle around a central clearing, like sentinels standing watch. The air felt different here, heavier, charged with an energy I couldn't identify. On the ground near the largest monolith lay a journal, its leather cover stained with moisture but its contents intact. I picked it up, flipping through pages filled with meticulous notes and hand-drawn maps. Project Sentinel, read the header on the first page. Classified operation to secure biological specimen from Olympic National Forest. Subject designation, primeval hominid. The journal detailed a private research organization's multi-year surveillance of the Olympic wilderness, documenting dozens of sightings and collecting physical evidence, hair samples, footprint casts, even thermal imaging recordings of large bipedal figures moving through dense forest. They weren't poachers or thrill seekers. They were a capture team, sent to bring back proof of Sasquatch's existence for scientific study and, undoubtedly, exploitation. The final entry, dated yesterday, chilled me. Specimen tracking has led us to what appears to be a significant habitat location. Thermal imaging suggests multiple subjects. Team preparing tranquilizer protocols for primary target acquisition. Local authorities have no knowledge of our presence. I closed the journal, understanding at last what had happened. These men had followed evidence to this sacred place, this habitat or gathering site, with the intention of capturing one of the forest's ancient guardians. Instead, they had become the hunted. As darkness began to fall, I realized I needed to leave immediately if I wanted to find my way back before nightfall. But something kept me rooted to the spot. A feeling that I was meant to witness what happened here. The hair on my arms rose as a sound emerged from the forest around me. Not a howl or growl, but something more complex. A language, perhaps, comprised of clicks, low rumbles, and vocalizations unlike anything in my experience. They were communicating, and they were close. Slowly, I placed the journal back exactly where I'd found it. Then, remembering Joseph Sky Eagle's teachings, I removed my ranger badge and placed it beside the journal. A token, an acknowledgement of their territory and sovereignty. I understand now, I said aloud, though I felt foolish speaking to the empty clearing. This place is yours, it always has been. I won't reveal its location. Only silence answered. But the tension in the air seemed to ease slightly. As I backed away from the stone circle, preparing to begin the long hike out before full darkness fell, movement caught my eye at the forest's edge. Not just one figure this time, but 3. Massive silhouettes, standing just within the tree line, watching me with unmistakable intelligence. I nodded once in their direction, then turned and began hiking back toward ranger territory, civilization in the world of humans, a world that would never know the truth about what guarded the deepest parts of these ancient forests. Some secrets, I realized, deserve to remain hidden. 3 weeks after the incidents at Blackwater Ridge, I sat across from Special Agent Diana Reeves in a sterile conference room at the Olympic National Forest headquarters. This marked my 5th interview with federal authorities, each session more pointed than the last. "Let's go over your statement once more," Reeves said, tapping her pen against a thick folder. "You pursued an unauthorized hunting party into restricted wilderness, discovered one deceased individual, found evidence of violence, and then, what? Decided to turn back without investigating further." I maintained the calm expression I'd practiced over countless similar interrogations. As stated in my report, darkness was falling. Continuing alone would have violated safety protocols. "Yet you violated protocols by pursuing these men in the first place," she countered. "And by turning off your radio." I made a judgment call based on immediate safety concerns for potential survivors. Reeves leaned forward. "4 men disappeared in those woods, Ranger. 1 body recovered, 3 still missing. Their employer, a private research foundation with significant government contracts, is demanding answers." I met her gaze steadily. "The mountains can be unforgiving. Hypothermia, predators, flash floods, disoriented individuals make poor decisions that often prove fatal. Their equipment suggests otherwise. These weren't amateurs. No terrain respects credentials, Agent Reeves." She changed tactics. "The recovered body showed no cause of death, no trauma, no evidence of animal attack, no signs of exposure or medical event. The coroner's official ruling was cardiac arrest induced by extreme fear." I said nothing. "What exactly did you see out there?" she pressed. The truth hovered between us, unspoken. I thought of the massive figures watching from the tree line, of ancient stone formations in a hidden valley, of territories marked on tribal maps with warnings passed down through generations. "I saw what happens when people disrespect the wilderness," I answered carefully. "Nothing more." After the interview, I drove back to my cabin, taking the long route through Forest Service roads that wound through sections of old-growth forest. The official investigation had produced predictably inconclusive results. The missing student had been found alive, his story of armed men confirmed but dismissed as a private security team conducting environmental research without proper permits. The 3 missing researchers remained officially listed as missing persons, presumed dead from environmental hazards. Their company had withdrawn all inquiries after receiving the journal I'd discovered, the same journal I'd found in the stone circle, minus several key pages detailing the exact location of the site. Mika had recovered from her injuries and transferred to another district, but not before sharing a final conversation with me that neither of us would ever report officially. "You saw them too," she'd said. Not a question but a statement. I'd nodded. "The official report says I fell down a ravine. That's what happened. And something carried me to safety. Splinted my leg." "You're an experienced wilderness guide. You treated your own injury." She'd studied me for a long moment. "Some truths aren't meant for reports, are they?" As I pulled up to my cabin, the forest around me felt different than it had before that fateful search operation. Not threatening but aware, as if the trees themselves had eyes, watching and evaluating. Inside, I opened my laptop and navigated to the Reddit forum where I'd first read accounts from other rangers. Using an anonymous account, I began typing. "I've been a ranger in the Olympic National Forest for 5 years. Recently, I encountered something that has changed how I view these woods forever. I won't share coordinates or specific locations, but I need to put this experience in writing, even if just to process what happened." I detailed the search operation, the footprints, the strange occurrences, careful to omit any information that might lead thrill-seekers or researchers to the sacred sites. I described the feeling of being watched, the intelligent eyes in the darkness. I detailed the search operation, the footprints, the strange occurrences, careful to omit any information that might lead thrill-seekers or researchers to the sacred sites. I described the feeling of being watched, the intelligent eyes in the darkness, the inexplicable help given to Mika. As I wrote, a notification appeared on my phone, a weather alert warning of an approaching storm system. Through my cabin window I could see dark clouds gathering above the distant peaks, a familiar sight in these mountains. I finished my post with words I hoped others in my position might understand. "There are guardians in these woods, older than our national parks, older than our nation itself. They don't need our protection, we need theirs. If you work in wild places and encounter something beyond explanation, show respect. Leave offerings, acknowledge boundaries. Some territories were never meant for us, and some creatures were never meant to be studied or captured or proven to exist. They are the land's first and final wardens, and we are merely guests in their domain." I hit submit, then closed my laptop. The first drops of rain began to patter against my roof as thunder rolled across the valleys. Pulling my chair closer to the window, I watched the storm sweep in, transforming the forest into a primeval landscape of shadow and sound. On my bookshelf, the worn copy of The Wendigo sat beside new editions, tribal histories, accounts of encounters spanning centuries, scientific papers on unclassified primate species. I had become a collector of possibilities, of glimpses beyond the veil of conventional understanding. The radio on my desk crackled with routine communications, weather updates, trail closures, the mundane business of forest management. Tomorrow I would return to my regular duties, file my reports, and maintain the careful balance between what I knew and what I could say. As darkness fell completely, obscuring the boundary between my small human outpost and the vast wilderness beyond, I caught a glimpse of movement at the tree line, just beyond my porch light's reach. A large shadow, upright and watchful. I didn't reach for my weapon. Instead, I raised my hand in a simple gesture of acknowledgement. The figure remained for just a moment longer, then melted into the darkness with impossible silence for something so large. I smiled to myself, no longer afraid. We had reached an understanding, the Guardians and I. Their secret was safe, and as long as I maintained that trust, so was I. The rain intensified, drumming against the roof in a soothing rhythm. Tomorrow would bring new hikers, new questions, new challenges. But tonight, I sat in peaceful alliance with the true keepers of the wilderness, respected, acknowledged, and accepted as one who understood the oldest law of the forest. Some truths belong only to those with the wisdom to protect them. My name is Itu, which means sun watching in the language of my Abenaki ancestors. But these days, there's little sun to watch from the darkness of these woods. Only shadows, mist, and an ever-present sense of being observed by something ancient and malevolent. I took this job as a wilderness guide and ranger in the remote forests of northern Maine for many reasons. To escape my troubled past in the city, where gambling debts and a ruined marriage had left me nearly destitute. To return to the land of my roots, where generations of my people once roamed free. And above all, to help others experience the majesty of the untamed woods, as my father and grandfather had. But nothing could have prepared me for the evil I encountered here. An evil whispered about in tribal legends, but which I had always dismissed as myths and campfire tales. Until now, it began when a group of campers failed to return from a trek to an old logging cabin deep in the misted valleys. I set out to find them, tracking their boot prints in the soft loam. But when I reached the cabin, I found only the splintered ruins of the door, claw marks gouged into the rough-hewn timber, and a single hiking boot lying in the dirt, stained with blood. They were gone. Taken. And that's when I first felt it. The sensation of being watched by unseen eyes, a creeping dread that crawled up my spine and nested in my skull. I knew then that I was no longer alone in those silent woods. Something else stalked those shadowed trails. Something that was not animal, not human. Something older than the forest itself, and infinitely more vicious. The watcher in the woods. I barely slept that night, sitting hunched before a guttering campfire with my father's old hunting rifle across my knees, listening to the night sounds of the forest. The hoot of an owl, the skitter of some small creature in the underbrush, the mournful cry of a loon on the ink-black lake, and threading through it all a hushed malevolence, a sense of an intelligence as cold and patient as the stars overhead, observing me, studying me, savoring my fear. Twice I thought I glimpsed it, sliding like liquid shadow between the black boles of the trees, but when I blinked it vanished, leaving me to wonder if it had only been branches stirring in the night wind. Or something far worse. I recalled the stories I had heard from the tribal elders, gathered around the crackling fires of my youth. Tales of the skinwalker, a malign spirit that could assume the form of any living creature, the better to hunt its human prey. A being of pure hunger and hate, born from the darkest myths of my people. Was that what I had seen? A nightmare-given flesh, hunting these mist-wreathed woods? Sleep was impossible, and dawn, when it finally came, brought no relief, only a leaden exhaustion. I knew I should abandon this place, report the missing campers to the authorities, and escape with my life. But the thought of others falling victim to that nameless thing kindled a slow burn of anger in my gut. This was my land, the land of my ancestors. Whatever dwelled in the dark hollows would find me no easy meat. After a quick breakfast of bacon and beans, I broke camp, shouldered my pack, and set out along the winding path that led deeper into the wilderness, following the faded boot prints of the lost ones. As a ranger, I had sworn an oath to protect those under my watch, and I aimed to keep it, even if it cost me everything, even if it cost me my life. The day passed in a blur of damp gray light filtering through crowns of fir and spruce, my breath steaming in the chill air. The forest seemed to watch me balefully as I trekked along paths obscured by drifts of fallen leaves, my senses straining for any sign of the missing campers, or the thing that had taken them. By midday, I reached a narrow defile where sheer granite cliffs reared up on either side, their dizzying heights vanishing into svelte banks of cloud. The way was treacherous here, with only a slim track winding between great boulders and fallen trees, and a steep drop beyond, where mist pooled in the valley like a moat of ghosts. It was there, on that lonely trail, that I found the first real signs of the creature's passing. Scattering of coarse black hairs, snagged on a splintered branch, the remains of some small animal, a marmot or hare, torn to gory shreds. Cloven hoofprints, stamped in the soft earth, far larger than those of any deer or elk. My blood ran cold at the sight. It was real then, that primal, lurking horror. And it knew I pursued it through its shadowed domain. I unslung my rifle and checked the load, my hands shaking slightly. The weapon seemed a pitiful defense against the inexplicable nightmare I faced. But it was all I had. Steeling myself, I pressed on, descending down the far side of the defile into a mist-shrouded hollow choked with moss-draped pines. Crude glyphs had been gouged into the trees, depicting figures with the heads of snarling beasts, their teeth bared in wordless rictus. I didn't need to be fluent in the old language of my people to understand their meaning. Here there be monsters. As if in answer to that grim thought, a terrible cry erupted from the fog ahead, ululating and inhuman. A sound of despair and fury and bottomless hunger. The desolate wail of the skinwalker. Slinging my rifle to my shoulder, I broke into a stumbling run, following that awful howl. I no longer cared about stealth or caution, only the overwhelming need to confront the watcher in the woods, and, if I could not defeat it, then to die fighting, as my ancestors had. Leading out a war whoop of my own, I plunged into the mist, and the horror that dwelled within. Time lost all meaning in that mist-drowned hollow. As I crashed through drifts of leaves, hurdled fallen logs, and clawed my way up, I saw only flitting shadows in the fog, heard only echoing cries that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Glimpses of something, there and gone. A flash of matted fur, the gleam of yellow eyes, a fleeting afterimage of a monstrous silhouette, there and gone between one blink and the next. Malodorous stench filled my nostrils, rotten meat and damp fur, and an underlying musk of something unearthly. It was the reek of the grave, of ancient barrows and boneyards, the feeder of long-buried things that should never have been unearthed. Then, all at once, I stumbled out from a screen of pine boughs into a silent glade, and the mist parted like a veil to reveal the old logging cabin. It crouched there amid a waste of briar and sumac, looking just as I remembered from my youth, when my father would bring me here on hunting trips. The same weathered timbers, the same sod roof sagging under the weight of years. But now, the windows gaped like lidless eyes, and the door hung drunkenly from one rusted hinge. Before that dark portal lay a litter of gnawed bones, broken antlers, shredded rags that might once have been clothing. And there, at the center of it all, sprawled the ravaged bodies of the missing campers, their sightless eyes staring up at the gray sky, their viscera steaming in the cold air. A wave of horror and revulsion crashed over me, followed by a terrible sinking despair. I had failed them, just as I had failed so many others in my life. My father, my wife, my unborn child, all lost to me because of my own weakness and folly. I sank to my knees in the blood-soaked earth, my rifle falling from numbed fingers. Hot tears coursed down my face, and a ragged sob tore from my throat. I no longer cared if the skinwalker took me. Part of me longed for the release of death, the chance to atone for my sins. But even as I knelt there, lost in my anguish, a flicker of movement caught my eye. There, at the edge of the clearing, something moved among the trees. Something that was not mist or shadow, but solid and real. My heart leapt with sudden, desperate hope, and I forced myself back to my feet, snatching up my rifle. Could it be? Had one of the campers survived, somehow? Staggering forward, I called out in a cracked voice, "Hello? Is someone there? I'm here to help." But the only answer was a soft, mocking laughter that seemed to come from the very trees themselves. A laughter that turned my blood to ice in my veins. "Oh, Ranger," a voice hissed from the shadows. "You cannot help them now. They are mine, as you soon shall be." I whirled toward the source of that sibilant voice, bringing my rifle to bear. And there, in a shaft of wan light, I beheld a figure that seemed to waver and flow like mist-made flesh. It was vaguely man-shaped, but taller, leaner, its proportions subtly wrong. Shaggy fur covered its powerful limbs, and wicked talons tipped its long fingers. But it was the face that froze the breath in my lungs. A nightmare visage caught between wolf and man, with a protruding muzzle lined with jagged fangs and eyes that glowed a lambent yellow, lit from within by a feral, cunning intelligence. The skinwalker, the watcher in the woods. For a moment, I could only stand there, paralyzed with atavistic terror. Every ancestral memory, every primal instinct screamed at me to flee, to cower, to abase myself before this ancient predator. But as I stared into those pitiless eyes, my fear transmuted into something else. A cold, implacable anger, a righteous fury, kindled by the broken bodies of the campers, by the monster's cruel taunts, by the pain and loss that had dogged my steps all my life, leading me to this final confrontation. "You," I said, my voice low and steady. "You're the one who's been stalking these woods, killing innocent people. But it ends now. It ends here." The skinwalker tilted its head, a hideously human gesture. "Brave words, for a mortal. But you have no power here. This is my domain as it has been since before your kind first walked these lands. I am eternal. I am hunger incarnate. And you are meat." With that, the creature lunged forward, a blur of shadow and savagery. But I was ready. I brought my rifle up and fired point blank into that snarling face. The bullet struck the skinwalker between its glowing eyes, and its head snapped back with a spray of black ichor. But incredibly, terribly, it did not fall. Instead, it let out a roar of fury and pain, and kept coming, its talons slashing for my throat. I fell back, desperately working the bolt of my rifle, but the creature was too fast. It caught me with a backhand blow that sent me sprawling, my weapon flying from my grasp to vanish in the fog. Dazed, bleeding, I scrabbled backward on hands and knees, feeling broken ribs grate in my chest. The skinwalker loomed over me, its maw dripping gore, its eyes blazing with malevolent glee. "Foolish mortal," it grated. "Did you think your pitiful weapons could harm me? I am the wild heart of these woods, the primal spirit of hunt and hunger. And now, I shall feast on your flesh, and your screams shall echo through these valleys for eternity." It reached for me, its talons poised to rend and tear. But even as it did, my groping fingers closed on something hard and cold, half buried in the loam. A stone, ancient and heavy, worn smooth by unknown ages. Desperately, I brought the stone up in a wild swing, catching the skinwalker across its snarling jaws. Bone crunched, and the creature reeled back, shaking its misshapen head in stunned disbelief. Surging to my feet, I pressed my attack, raining down blows with the stone, aiming for those glowing eyes, that fanged maw. Black blood spattered my face, my hands, but still I did not relent, could not relent. "This is for the lost ones," I shouted, punctuating each word with a crushing impact. "For the land, for my people." Something shattered beneath my onslaught, and abruptly the skinwalker collapsed, folding in on itself like a rotten snag crumbling to pulp. Its form seemed to shrink, to diminish, until nothing remained but a mound of matted fur and splintered bone. Panting, I stared down at the grisly remains, scarcely daring to believe it was over. The stone slipped from my blood-slick fingers, clattering to the ground like a gavel pronouncing final judgment. I had won. Against all odds I had prevailed. But the victory felt hollow, empty. It could not bring back the dead, or undo the long, lonely years of grief and pain. All I could do was make my slow, limping way back through the fog-bound forest, to bear witness to what had happened here, to tell the tale, so that others might be spared the horror that had haunted these hills for so long. And as I walked, I fancied I could hear the whisper of ancient voices on the chill wind, the voices of my ancestors, welcoming me home at last. The world felt different after that day in the forest, sharper somehow, more real, as if a veil had been ripped away, exposing the true, raw face of existence. I told my story to the authorities, to the media, to anyone who would listen, but few believed me. The official report chalked it up to a bear attack, a tragic case of mistaken identity. The ravaged bodies of the campers were laid to rest, and life in the little towns and logging camps went on much as it always had. But I knew the truth, and I would not be silent. I wrote down my account, every detail seared into my memory, and sent it far and wide, to newspapers, to magazines, to obscure websites dedicated to the paranormal and the unexplained. Gradually, other stories began to surface, other encounters with strange, shadowy figures in lonely wood and desolate moor. Creatures that blurred the line between beast and man, between nightmare and reality. I pored over those accounts, searching for patterns, for clues to the origins and nature of the thing I had faced. And as I did, a grim certainty took hold in my mind. The skinwalker might be gone, but it was not the only one of its kind. There were others out there, lurking in the wild places of the world. Ancient spirits of hunger and hate, waiting to prey on the unwary and the innocent. And now, armed with hard-won knowledge and bitter wisdom, it was my duty to hunt them, to track them to their lairs and destroy them, as I had the Watcher in the woods. No longer a mere ranger, I became something more, a guardian of the borderlands between the natural and the unnatural, a warrior against the dark. It would be a long, hard road, I knew, a lonely one, steeped in blood and terror, but I would walk it to the end, whatever that end might be. For I was Atu, he who watched the sun, and I had found my true calling at last, in the savage heart of the wild.